I grew up in rural New Jersey, a few miles out from a small town called Stillwater, where the houses were spaced out and silence at night was so thick it rang in your ears. My parents were blue-collar folks. My dad was a mechanic, and my mom worked nights at a nursing home. When I turned 20, I moved out, rented a tiny house at the edge of town, and got a job working part-time at a hardware store. It wasn't glamorous, but it was quiet and simple. That was before the night I came to believe, truly believe, that something was watching me. The house was a one-bedroom place with a screen porch and a gravel driveway. It sat close to the woods, which stretched for miles out toward an old abandoned quarry. That was the first thing the landlord mentioned in a kind of offhand way during the walkthrough. "Don't worry about the woods," he said. "Kids used to sneak back there, but you won't have any trouble." I didn't think much of it. I wasn't exactly the type to scare easily. It started with something stupid. My cat, Lily, acting strange. She was a rescued gray tabby, usually the type to snooze in sunbeams and attack dust motes, but she began standing at the sliding glass door to the backyard every night, staring out like she was hypnotized. I figured it was deer or raccoons, maybe foxes. Still, it was weird. I tried snapping my fingers to get her attention once, and she didn't even blink, just kept staring into the woods. The second thing was more unsettling. I came home from work one night and noticed the porch light was off. I always kept it on because the area didn't have any streetlights and the darkness out there could be suffocating. I figured the bulb blew, but when I flicked the switch, it turned on without a problem. Maybe a power surge or a breaker issue, I thought. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had turned it off deliberately. Then came the knocking. It was about 2:30 in the morning when I first heard it. A single deliberate knock on the front door. I sat up straight in bed, frozen, straining to hear it again. The knock didn't repeat, but Lily jumped down from the windowsill and ran under the bed. I got up, grabbed the bat I kept next to the dresser, and crept through the house. The front door has one of those frosted glass panes, and I couldn't see anything through it. I waited for a few minutes listening, but the only sound was the wind in the trees. I told myself it was a branch. I went back to sleep. But the next night, it happened again. Same time, same knock. A slow, deliberate knock, not someone banging or trying to get in, just waiting to be let in. I didn't open the door. I couldn't. I stood behind it with the bat, sweating, heart pounding, convinced I'd see a face staring back through the glass. But there was nothing. No footsteps in the gravel, no shadow under the door, just that heavy silence. The third night, I called my friend Corey. He lived in town and was one of the few people I trusted enough to tell without sounding like I was losing it. "Dude, it's probably just some tweaker messing around," he said. "Or kids trying to mess with you. You live by the woods, right?" "Yeah, but there's no one around me, like, no houses nearby. They'd have to hike through half a mile of trees." "Could be someone camping out. I'll come by tomorrow night and stay over. Bring some beers. We'll catch whoever it is." Corey showed up around 9 the next night, and we set up in the living room with the lights off and a couple of flashlights. We were half joking about it, laughing nervously, trying to play it cool. Midnight passed, then 1. Around 2:30, just like before, the knock came. It was louder this time. Corey looked at me, his smile gone. "That's not a kid," he whispered. We both stood there, unmoving. Then he crept to the window by the front door and slowly pulled back the curtain. "Do you see anyone?" I whispered. He didn't answer. I crossed the room and looked with him. Nothing, just the porch and the shadow of the woods beyond it. "I swear to God, I heard it right here," Corey said, his voice tight. "It wasn't in the back. It was right here." We opened the door together, stepping out onto the porch. It was cold, the kind of cold that didn't make sense for that time of year. The hairs on my arms stood up. The night was still. No wind. No insects. The kind of silence that feels like it's pressing on your eardrums. We scanned the area with flashlights, even walked to the edge of the woods. Nothing. No footprints. No movement. But Corey wasn't laughing anymore. "I'm not staying out here," he said. "Man, something's not right." He left early the next morning and didn't come back. That night, I tried not to sleep. I kept every light on, sat on the couch with the TV on low, and waited. 2:30 came. The knock didn't. But then I heard the back door creak. I don't know how I moved. It was like my body acted on its own. I rushed to the kitchen where the door led out to the backyard, heart hammering in my chest. I didn't open it. I just stood there staring at it, waiting to hear something else. And I did. A whisper. Barely audible, but definitely human. It came from just outside the door, like someone leaning in close to the wood. I see you. I ran. I ran. I grabbed my keys and Lillian got in my car. I didn't stop driving until I was parked in the hardware store lot under the big floodlights. I slept in the car that night. I called my landlord the next morning, told him there was someone creeping around. He came out and walked the property with me. We didn't find anything but I noticed something he didn't. The wind chime hanging by the back door, the one that hadn't moved in weeks, was gone. Just the hook remained. I can put in some security lights, he said. Motion sensors, maybe a camera. Yeah, I said, but I was barely listening. The next few nights, I didn't stay there. I slept at a motel in town. By the fifth night, I convinced myself I was overreacting. Maybe I'd imagined the whisper. Maybe stress and lack of sleep had twisted everything out of proportion. I went back home. I even laughed a little at myself while I made dinner, windows open, sun going down. Then, as I was doing dishes, I saw something move past the window above the sink. A shape, a pale figure. I dropped the plate in the sink and ran outside. Nothing. Again, nothing. But when I turned around to go back in, the front door was wide open. I had locked it. I know I had. Lily was gone. I searched the house, calling her name, crying now, full-blown panic. Then I heard a soft thump from the bedroom closet. The door was closed. I never closed it. I walked toward it, every step feeling heavier than the last. My hands were shaking as I reached out and opened the door. Lily was sitting there, eyes wide, fur puffed up. She hissed and bolted past me. Behind her, inside the closet, was the wind chime, just hanging there. From the rail, no string, no explanation. I moved out that same night. I didn't even pack. I took Lily, my wallet, my phone, and drove straight to my parents' house. I never went back. I told the landlord I wasn't coming back. He didn't argue, just said, "You're not the first." I asked him what he meant. There was a long silence before he said, "House sat empty for a long time. Last tenant left everything behind too. Cops said it was probably squatters, but he used to say someone was in the woods watching him." That was 2 years ago. I still have nightmares. Sometimes I wake up at 2:30 a.m. for no reason, and I swear I hear that knock in my dreams. I live in the city now, surrounded by people, lights, and noise. I haven't had anything happen since, but sometimes I think about the woods, the whisper, the pale shape, and I wonder what would have happened if I'd opened that back door. Story the end. The night I moved into the old house on Maple Street, I thought it was just an ordinary new beginning. I'd spent months searching for a place that felt like mine, something modest but affordable. The house was a small two-story built sometime in the 1920s with faded green shutters and a porch that sagged just slightly to one side. The landlord said it had been empty for nearly a year and that the previous tenant left in a hurry. I didn't ask why. I was just glad to get my own space. The first few nights passed quietly. The creaks and groans of an old house settling were all I heard, which was normal. The neighborhood was quiet too, mostly families who were early to bed and occasional passing cars on the street. It felt peaceful, and I was finally beginning to relax. But then it started. The first time, I was lying in bed, scrolling through my phone. It was about 2:30 a.m. when I heard it. Soft, deliberate tapping at the front door. I froze. The porch light was off, and the hallway was dark, but I could clearly hear the taps. 3, pause, 2. 3, pause, 2. They were slow and measured, almost rhythmic. I told myself it must be a prank or some stranger confused about the address. I didn't answer, and the tap stopped after a minute. I tried to convince myself to go check, but the dread held me down. I lay in bed, heart racing until dawn. The next day, I told the landlord about the noise. He shrugged it off. "Old houses do weird things," he said. "Might have been branches or an animal." I nodded, but I didn't feel convinced. That night, the tapping came again, this time at the window beside my bed. I sat up, staring at the glass, but there was no one there. No movement in the yard, no shadow. The porch light flickered, and I blinked. The tapping continued. 3 taps, pause, 2 taps again. Suddenly I heard a whisper, so faint I thought I was imagining it. My name. Sarah. It was soft but clear. I jumped out of bed and switched on the light. The yard was empty. No footsteps in the dirt, no sign someone had been there. For days, the tapping and whispers continued, always late at night, always the same pattern. 3 taps, then 2. Sometimes the whispering called my name, sometimes it begged for something I couldn't understand. One evening, I confided in a coworker, Lisa, about the strange noises. She looked concerned. "You sure it's not someone messing with you?" she asked. "I've checked the locks and there's no sign of forced entry," I said. "And the taps don't match any pattern I know. It feels intentional." Lisa suggested I set up a security camera. The next day, I bought a cheap one and pointed it at the front door and the window. The first few nights, nothing appeared on the footage, but on the 5th night, I reviewed the recording. At exactly 2:32 a.m., the camera showed a faint figure standing just outside the door. It was translucent, almost like smoke, shaped vaguely like a man, but with no distinguishable features. It stood still, staring at the door for several minutes, then faded away. I showed Lisa the clip. She gasped. "That's a ghost," she whispered. I didn't know what to believe anymore. The tapping and whispering grew more urgent after that. Sometimes I felt cold spots in the hallway, and like icy drafts where no windows were open. Footsteps echoed on the wooden floorboards outside my bedroom door at odd hours, but whenever I opened it, there was nothing. One night, I woke to a pounding on the door. It was frantic and desperate. I grabbed my phone to call 911, but the screen was blank. No signal, no response. The pounding stopped abruptly, and silence swallowed the house again. After that night, I started researching the house's history. The local library archives revealed a grim past. About 80 years ago, a man named Thomas had lived there with his wife, Margaret. One winter, Margaret disappeared mysteriously. Some said she ran away, others whispered darker stories. Thomas was said to have been obsessed, searching for her relentlessly until he died alone in the house years later. I felt a chill thinking about it. The tapping pattern, 3 taps, 2 taps, felt like a code, like someone was trying to communicate from beyond. Lisa and I tried reaching out to a local medium who agreed to visit the house. She told us the spirit of Thomas was trapped, still searching for his lost wife, desperate and confused. The tapping was his attempt to reach out, to break through the veil. We conducted a small cleansing ritual at her suggestion, lighting candles and offering prayers. The tapping slowed, then stopped for a few nights, but then it came back with a vengeance. One particularly cold night, I heard footsteps outside my bedroom window. I peered out and saw nothing but the empty yard under the moonlight. Then a face appeared in the glass, pale, sunken eyes staring directly at me. I stumbled back, gasping, and the face vanished. I couldn't stay another night. I packed my things and moved out the next day. Years later, I still get chills thinking about that house on Maple Street. Sometimes, late at night, I swear I hear tapping at my own front door. 3 taps, pause, 2 taps, and I wonder if Thomas is still out there waiting for Margaret. Story the end. It was just past midnight when I got the first knock at the door. I live alone in a small rental home on the edge of town, tucked between an overgrown field and a line of rotting pine trees. The kind of place you can't really see from the road unless you know what to look for. It's cheap, quiet, and forgotten. I'd moved in a few months earlier after a rough breakup and wanted peace more than anything. The kind of peace where no one knows your name. That night, I was up late finishing a bottle of wine, scrolling on my phone, trying to convince myself to go to bed. It had been raining lightly, just enough to make everything shimmer under the porch light. I had my TV on low, some random show in the background, but I heard it clearly. 3 slow knocks. They weren't loud, not the kind that demands your attention, but deliberate. I froze. No one comes out here. No delivery drivers, no door-to-door salesmen. My closest neighbor was a quarter mile away, an older guy who didn't speak much and minded his business. I sat there for a second, my wine glass halfway to my lips, heart kicking up in my chest. Knock, knock, knock. Again, same rhythm. I turned off the TV, stood slowly, and moved toward the door without switching on any more lights. The porch light, always on for safety, glowed soft yellow through the front window. I leaned to the side, peeking through the small glass panel. Nothing. There was no one on the porch, just the wet wooden boards, the rusted railing, and the empty field beyond. I opened the door slowly, the old hinges creaking as I leaned my head out. "Hello?" I called, more out of nervous habit than anything. Silence. Rain whispered against the trees. The wind picked up just enough to sway the porch swing, but I saw no movement, no footsteps in the puddles, no retreating figure. I waited a few seconds before closing the door again and locking the deadbolt. I tried to shake it off. Maybe a branch hit the house, maybe an animal or a raccoon had somehow made noise that sounded like a knock. I told myself all the rational things, poured the rest of the wine, and forced myself to sleep on the couch with the TV back on for comfort. At 2:47 a.m., I woke up to the third set of knocks. 3 again. Always 3. Measured as though someone had practiced. This time the knocks came from the back door. There's no porch in the back, just a screen door leading to the backyard, where the field stretches out into blackness and eventually meets the woods. I sat upright on the couch, holding my breath. The knocking didn't come again. I grabbed the flashlight from the kitchen drawer and moved quietly through the house. The back of the house is darker than the front. No streetlights, no neighboring lights, just shadows and the occasional flicker of moonlight when clouds passed. I crept up to the back door. The curtains over the window were sheer, and as I approached, I thought I saw the outline of someone. Just a tall, still figure. I stopped in my tracks. My chest tightened. I didn't want to move the curtain, I didn't want to confirm it, but the shape didn't move. I waited a full minute. Nothing. Then I pulled the curtain back fast, flashlight aimed. There was no one there, no movement in the yard, no footprints in the mud. The screen door didn't even creak, just the quiet of rain, falling soft now. But I knew what I saw. Someone had been standing there. I could still feel it. I checked the entire house, windows, doors, even closets, and then I sat with the flashlight on beside me until morning. I called the local sheriff's office that day just to ask if there had been any reports. The dispatcher was polite but disinterested. No reports of anything strange, she said. I didn't mention the knocking. I didn't want to sound like I was losing it. That night, I installed a camera over the front door and another facing the backyard. Cheap models, but they sent alerts to my phone when triggered. I felt better knowing I'd at least catch something if it happened again. And for almost a week, nothing did. Then the alerts started. The first one came at 3:14 a.m. Camera 2, the backyard, detected motion. I didn't hear any knocks that night, but when I checked the video the next morning, my blood ran cold. The footage was blurry and grainy, cheap night vision with washed-out gray tones, but I could see a figure standing just beyond the backyard, at the edge of the field, not moving, just watching the house. The timestamp confirmed it. They stood there for over 7 minutes before walking away slowly into the woods. I tried to rationalize it, maybe a lost hiker or some local messing around, but the direction they came from made no sense. The woods aren't near any trails, and that stillness, that wasn't curiosity or drunken wandering. That was deliberate. I showed the video to my neighbor, the old man who rarely spoke. He watched quietly, then looked at me and said, "You ought to move." That was it. Just that. The next night I heard scratching at the back door. Not an animal kind of scratching, something slow and rhythmic. I sat on the floor of the living room, lights off, holding a kitchen knife and listening as it went on for nearly 20 minutes. My phone vibrated twice. Camera alert. Camera 2. But the screen was black. I thought it was a glitch. Then I realized someone had covered the lens. The next morning, I found muddy fingerprints smeared across the camera and nothing on the footage after midnight. The front camera had caught nothing, but the knocking returned. This time it was on the window of my bedroom, which sits facing the field. 3 taps, not knocks, just the sound of fingernails, or something like them, on glass. I didn't look. I just sat under the covers, trying not to breathe, heart racing like I'd run for miles. I don't know how long it lasted. At some point, I must have fallen asleep from pure exhaustion. When I woke up, it was morning, and the window was smeared with what looked like mud or ash. Dark streaks across the glass like fingers dragged slowly downward. I called the sheriff again. They sent a deputy to take a look. He was younger, polite, but didn't seem overly concerned. Took a few pictures, asked if I had enemies, exes, anything like that. I said no. He told me he'd do a few drive-bys at night to check the area, but nothing ever came of it. The night after his visit, I stayed awake again, determined to see it, to catch whoever it was. At 2:58 a.m., the front camera triggered. I checked the feed instantly. Nothing, just the porch, wet from rain. Porch swing swaying slightly. But I heard it. Not a knock this time, a whisper. It was so faint I thought I imagined it at first, but it came again, clearer. Let me in. Right against the front door. A voice low, soft, and unfamiliar. Male, but something was wrong with it, like it wasn't coming from a throat, more like a breathy imitation of speech. Let me in. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just stared at the door and watched the shadow beneath it. I saw something shift, then vanish. The whisper stopped. The camera never caught a thing. The next morning, I checked every inch of the porch. No footprints, no signs of anything. But the swing had been turned fully around, that ropes twisted like someone had spun it violently. I started sleeping with the lights on after that. I didn't tell anyone. What could I even say? Someone's standing outside my house every night, whispering, knocking, but they never show up on video and they don't leave a trace. It got worse. A week later, I woke to find my front door wide open. Nothing taken, nothing disturbed, just open. Like someone had stepped in, watched me sleep, and left again. I started locking the bedroom door after that too. I pushed a chair under the knob. 2 nights after that, I found deep scratches on the bedroom windowsill. Not claw marks, long, precise lines, almost like carving. The next day, I packed a bag and stayed in a motel for a few days. I needed out, needed sleep. Nothing happened there. No knocks, no whispers. But the moment I returned to the house, it all came back. The final night I spent there, I woke up around 3:22 a.m., covered in sweat, heart pounding. I didn't know why. There had been no sound, no alert, just a crushing sense of dread. Then I heard it. Footsteps in the hallway. Heavy, deliberate, slow. They stopped outside my bedroom door. I held my breath, gripping the knife I now kept under my pillow. Then came the knock. Not on the door, on the wall, just beside the door frame. 3 times. I stared at the door, waiting for the knob to turn, for something to enter. But it didn't. I don't know how long I waited. But the next thing I remember was waking up at dawn, light pouring through the window, birds chirping. The door was still locked, the chair still wedged beneath the knob, but the knife was gone. I left that morning and never went back. I paid a company to collect my things and put them in storage. When I asked if they noticed anything strange, one of the movers said, "That place gave me the creeps, like someone was watching us the whole time." I moved across the state, changed my number, started over. I still check the cameras remotely sometimes, even though the house is empty, hasn't been rented since. But sometimes around 3 a.m., camera 2 still triggers. And there's no one there, except the field, the trees, and something just out of view, watching. Story the end. It was close to 1 a.m. when Beth finally put down her phone and killed the lamp beside her bed. Her small apartment was quieter than usual. No humming from neighbors, no late-night stomping above, and even the usual sound of traffic had thinned out. Just the soft tick of her wall clock and the faint creaks of her 100-year-old building shifting in the night. She rolled over and let out a sigh, too aware of the silence to sleep. She had moved into the place 2 weeks earlier. It was a quaint 1-bedroom unit on the 2nd floor of an old converted house in a small town in Pennsylvania. The rent was affordable, and the landlord, Mr. Hepler, seemed harmless enough. The previous tenant had moved out in a hurry, according to Hepler, but he'd shrugged it off, saying, "Kids these days always want something new." She had felt uneasy the first night, but chalked it up to new apartment jitters. But the feeling hadn't gone away. If anything, it had deepened. She'd wake up multiple times each night with no real cause, her heart racing. There were moments she'd walk into the living room and feel someone had just left it. A chill would crawl across her shoulders for no reason. Once, while brushing her teeth, she swore she heard someone whisper from behind the shower curtain. She'd thrown it open, her toothbrush clutched like a weapon, but no one had been there. Tonight felt different, though. Heavier, darker. Lying still, she tried to settle her breath, focusing on the soft breeze rattling the maple tree outside her window. She was just starting to drift off when she heard it. 3 slow, distinct knocks on her window. Her heart lurched. Her bedroom window faced the backyard alley. No one should be back there, especially not at this hour. She stayed frozen for a moment, convinced she imagined it. Then it came again. 3 deliberate knocks, this time louder, not frantic, calm. Like whoever or whatever was out there wasn't in a hurry. She sat up slowly, straining her ears. The window was covered by thick curtains she hadn't opened in days. For a long moment she didn't move, heart pounding in her ears. She couldn't bring herself to pull them back. Her phone was on the nightstand. She grabbed it and turned the flashlight on, the beam cutting a narrow cone of light through the dark. With another shaky breath, she stood and tiptoed to the window. She hesitated, then yanked the curtain aside. There was nothing there, just the dark shape of the maple tree swaying in the wind, casting twisted shadows on the ground. She looked down. No footprints in the dirt. She waited, staring hard, convinced she might see movement. Nothing. Shaking, she let the curtain fall and turned back to her bed. And that's when she heard it again. Not at the window this time. At the front door. 3 knocks, just as slow, just as measured. She froze in the hallway, her socks sliding slightly on the hardwood floor. The front door had a peephole, but no security chain. The old house didn't even have a deadbolt. She crept forward, flashlight still in hand. As she approached, she noticed something odd. The porch light was off. It had been on earlier when she took the trash out. She never turned it off. She reached the door, stood to the side, and leaned forward, peering through the peephole. Nothing. The porch was empty. But before she could exhale, a voice came from the other side of the door. A low whisper, as if someone's mouth was pressed against the wood. "Let me in, Beth." Her entire body went rigid. The voice was male, low and calm. She had never heard it before. "Beth," it said again, quieter this time. "You're awake. I know you're awake." She staggered backward, mouth open but unable to scream. Yet her thoughts were racing. How did he know her name? "Go away," she whispered, her voice trembling. The doorknob twitched. Just a small movement, but enough. She ran to the kitchen and grabbed the largest knife she could find. Her phone was still in her hand. She dialed 911, but the call didn't go through. No signal. That made no sense. She had 5 bars when she was in the bedroom. She rushed back and saw the signal icon dead. Just an X. She looked outside again. No one. But this time her gaze caught something. In the tree. A figure. Standing among the branches. A man, or something shaped like a man, was crouched there, half hidden in the leaves. She blinked, and it was gone. The curtain fluttered a moment later, though the window remained closed. She turned and locked herself in the bathroom, barricading the door with her laundry basket. Knife in one hand, phone in the other, she sat on the closed toilet lid and tried to breathe. For 20 minutes, nothing happened. Then a soft tapping began at the bathroom window. Again, deliberate, like it was playing with her. She didn't dare open the curtain. The tapping stopped after a minute, but she didn't leave. She sat there all night, knees to chest, until the faint light of morning came through the window. Only then did she come out. The apartment was empty. Nothing was broken. The front door was still locked. Her phone signal was back. She texted her sister in a panic, then called the police. They came and looked around. No signs of forced entry, no footprints, no damage to the window screens or door. One of the officers asked if she'd been under any stress lately, in a voice that suggested he thought she was imagining things. They left without finding anything. That day, she packed a bag and stayed with her sister. For a few days, nothing happened. She managed to sleep again, even laugh. Then one night, her sister was out with friends. Beth stayed in and decided to finally get some rest. The house was quiet, safe. At 12:48 a.m., her phone buzzed. Unknown number. No text, just a voicemail. She hesitated, then played it. There was no voice, just breathing. Then a whisper. "Why'd you leave, Beth?" She dropped the phone. It kept playing. "Doesn't matter. I'm already inside." She spun around, every light on in the house, heart hammering. But no one was there. She didn't sleep. When her sister got home, she begged to stay with her for a few more nights. But the messages kept coming, always from unknown numbers, always late at night. Once, while brushing her teeth, she looked up and saw something in the mirror, a shape behind her. It flickered like a glitch, and then was gone. She stopped being able to sleep altogether. A week later, her sister found her in the guest room corner, wide-eyed and rocking back and forth, clutching her phone. The window had been opened. She had locked it the night before. On the wall were 3 words scratched in with something sharp. "Someone's outside again." They moved out a month later. New town, new names on the mailbox, new phone numbers. Beth sleeps during the day now. She tries to stay awake at night, but sometimes exhaustion wins. Sometimes she hears something outside the window. A soft knock. 3 of them. Story the end. It was a Tuesday night in late October, the kind where the air hangs damp and cold, but not quite cold enough to justify cranking up the heat. The sky had turned that murky, purple-gray as dusk gave way to full darkness. Sarah was alone in the house. Her fiancé, Mark, had flown out to Portland for work that morning and wouldn't be back until the weekend. She didn't mind being by herself. The solitude was usually comforting, even refreshing after a long day. The house wasn't huge, but it had character. It sat nestled at the end of a wooded cul-de-sac, with towering birch trees that scraped against the second-story windows when the wind kicked up. Their home had once belonged to an older couple who passed away within a year of each other, and Sarah and Mark had been thrilled to get it for well under market value. They loved the idea of quiet charm and had worked hard to make it cozy. That night, Sarah curled up on the couch with her laptop, a mug of peppermint tea cooling beside her, and her cat, Luna, purring softly on the cushion next to her thigh. She'd just finished rewatching a few episodes of The Fall and was replying to emails from work when she heard the first sound. It was faint, almost indistinct, a soft scraping noise at the back of the house. She paused and leaned back, pulling her headphones off to listen. Luna's ears perked up too, swiveling toward the sound. She waited a moment, but there was nothing more. Probably a raccoon or a branch falling, she thought. The back of the house opened to a small patio, and beyond that a wooded incline that dropped off into a thicket of trees. Wildlife was common out there. She shrugged it off and went back to typing. About 20 minutes later, just after 9 p.m., Luna suddenly stood up, tail puffed out and rigid. She stared toward the sliding glass doors at the back of the living room. "What's wrong, girl?" Sarah whispered, turning to look. The lights inside cast enough of a glare on the glass that she couldn't see much beyond her own reflection. But something, some primal instinct, made her lean in and squint. And then she saw it, a figure, standing motionless just beyond the deck railing. Her breath caught. It was too dark to make out much detail, but it was clearly a person, tall, still, and just barely swaying like they'd been standing there for a while. The form wasn't moving toward the house, wasn't knocking or trying to get her attention, just watching. Sarah's heart beat like a drum in her throat. She instinctively reached for her phone on the coffee table, but froze. She blinked and looked again. The figure was gone. "Jesus," she muttered, hand trembling as she unlocked her phone and opened the camera to try and zoom in through the glass. Nothing. She told herself it was a trick of the shadows, maybe even her reflection, or someone walking by on the cul-de-sac behind the trees. Still, she got up and locked the back door. Then, for good measure, she walked through the house and double-checked every window and entrance. Everything was locked. It took her over an hour to calm down. She played music low on her phone, turned on every light in the downstairs rooms, and finally poured herself a glass of wine. Luna seemed fine again and even hopped back on the couch, purring like nothing had happened. Sarah eventually fell asleep with the TV playing some mindless sitcom reruns. At 2:43 a.m., she woke to a noise. It wasn't loud, more like a click or pop. Her mouth was dry and her eyes took a moment to adjust in the darkness. The TV had turned itself off the way it did when left idle too long. She sat up slowly, listening. Silence. Then from upstairs, a light creak. She wasn't sure if it had come from the hall or the master bedroom. Her throat tightened. She lived here. She knew this house. It didn't creak randomly. She picked up her phone and turned on the flashlight. Luna had vanished. Her legs felt like jelly as she tiptoed through the hallway. She flicked the upstairs light switch. Nothing. The bulb must have gone out. Great. Halfway up the stairs, she heard a soft shuffling noise coming from the guest room. She should have run. She should have gone straight to the door and outside to a neighbor's house, but instead she walked toward the room, heart thundering, hand trembling. The door was cracked open an inch. She nudged it with her foot. The room was empty. Nothing but boxes and some old furniture they hadn't gotten around to arranging. Then, from downstairs, a soft, deliberate knock at the back sliding glass door. Not a tap. A slow, rhythmic knock. 3 times. Her stomach turned to ice. She backed away from the guest room and hurried down the stairs. Her legs felt too slow, like they were pushing through water. When she reached the living room again, she stopped several feet away from the door. There, through the glass, was a face, pale and still, almost featureless in the dim light, but with two impossibly dark eye sockets. The face was pressed against the glass, mouth slightly parted and unmoving. She couldn't even tell if it was breathing. Sarah screamed. She turned and ran for the front door, dialing 911 as she went. The dispatcher answered quickly, and Sarah told them someone was outside her house. They stayed on the line with her while she crouched near the front closet, waiting for the sound of sirens. When the officers arrived, she ran outside to meet them, crying and shaking. They searched the property. Nothing. No footprints. No signs anyone had been out there. Even the back deck had no markings. The glass door showed no smudges. No prints. "You're sure it wasn't a dream?" one of the officers asked gently. Sarah just stared at him, furious. "I saw someone right there, and I heard someone upstairs too." They walked through the house again. Still nothing. By 4 a.m., the officers were gone, and Sarah had rechecked every lock 3 more times. She stayed up until the sun began to rise. She slept most of the following day and made sure to keep in touch with Mark, though she didn't tell him everything, only that she'd seen someone outside and called the police. She didn't want to freak him out while he was across the country. That night, she left most of the lights on. At around 10:30 p.m., just as she was starting to relax, she saw Luna again standing in front of the sliding glass door. But this time, the cat wasn't curious or afraid. She was hissing. Her tail was low, her body rigid. Sarah's breath caught. She walked slowly to where the cat stood and crouched beside her, and then she heard it again. 3 slow knocks, but this time not at the back, at the front door. She whipped around. The front entry was partially obscured by a wall, but she could see the hallway clearly. No movement, no shadow. She grabbed her phone and moved toward the door, her feet practically weightless with fear. No one at the door, no sound. Then her phone vibrated in her hand. A text. It was from Mark. Only it wasn't his number. It read, "Why did you call the police?" Her mouth went dry. She stared at the message, heart pounding so hard she felt like she might pass out. Another text came in. "I just wanted to look at you. You looked so peaceful on the couch." She dropped the phone. Then came a knock, right at the window beside her. She spun around and saw the pale face again. This time closer, clearer. The mouth was grinning. The figure tilted its head slowly, then vanished from view in a blur. She screamed and backed into the dining room, reaching for the knife block on the counter. That's when the lights flickered and went out. Every bulb. Total darkness. She ran, out the door into the street, barefoot and panicked. She didn't stop until she was at the neighbor's house, banging frantically on the door. The neighbors were kind. They called the police again. This time the response was quicker, more thorough. Still nothing. No signs of anyone. The texts, her phone had no record of them, not even in deleted messages. But Sarah knew. She wasn't crazy. Someone had been there. Maybe not. Someone. Mark cut his trip short and came home the next morning. They stayed in a hotel for the next week while security was installed, cameras, motion lights, alarms. But nothing else happened until last Thursday. It had been nearly a year. Life had returned to something close to normal. Sarah went outside to get the mail. It was a bright day. She hadn't thought about that night in months. At the bottom of the stack of mail was an envelope. No stamp, no return address. Inside was a single Polaroid photo. It was her, sleeping on the couch, TV on. Luna curled beside her, taken from inside the house. There was writing on the back. "I never left. You just stopped looking." Sarah dropped the envelope and screamed so loud the neighbors came running. They moved out the next day. The house is still empty. But every few weeks, the real estate agent says the alarm goes off in the middle of the night. Each time, the security cameras show nothing. Just darkness. Except once. 2 months ago, the agent told Sarah they'd finally caught something on the footage. It was only for a few seconds, just a shape standing in the living room. Tall, unmoving, facing the couch. Story the end. It was one of those nights where the quiet outside felt thick, like it was pressing up against the windows. Emily had just gotten off a double shift at the ER and was finally home, wrapped in her oversized robe, barefoot, sitting on the couch with her legs tucked under her. The house was small, only 2 bedrooms, but it was cozy, and most importantly, it was hers. She'd moved in just a month ago, finally deciding to live alone after years of roommates. That Friday night was supposed to be her first peaceful evening in weeks. Outside, the wind was pushing softly against the trees, barely noticeable under the low hum of the refrigerator. The neighborhood was quiet, tucked in a wooded area about 20 minutes from downtown. Most houses were spread apart, with long gravel driveways that gave just enough distance between neighbors to feel private, but not isolated. At least, that's what she had told herself. Emily turned off the kitchen light and made her way to the living room, plopping down onto the couch. The only light in the room was the soft blue glow of the TV as some old sitcom played in the background. It was well past midnight, and she debated just falling asleep right there when she heard it. The first knock. 3 slow, deliberate knocks against the front door. Her body froze. It wasn't the kind of knock someone gave by mistake. It wasn't like the UPS guy tapping lightly and leaving a package. It was loud enough to echo through the house, confident enough to suggest the person on the other side wasn't a stranger to the home. But it was late. Too late for anyone to be casually dropping by. She didn't move. She strained her ears to listen. Nothing followed the knock. No footsteps on the porch. No jiggling of the doorknob. No voice calling out. Just that crushing silence again. After maybe a full minute, she tiptoed toward the front window, crouched low, and slowly pulled back the curtain just a sliver. She expected to see someone, maybe a neighbor in distress or a lost driver. But the porch was empty. The night outside seemed untouched. Still, she waited by the window for a while, peeking through the glass. Her porch light flickered slightly. It had done that since she moved in, and her heart jumped at every little movement of shadow. Finally, she decided it must have been a prank. Maybe some teenager being stupid. She turned off the TV, headed to her bedroom, and locked the door behind her. She lay in bed, facing the door, watching the shadows crawl on the floor under the soft light of her nightstand lamp. Some time passed. She didn't check the clock. She didn't want to know how late it was. Just as her eyes started to close, she heard it again. Another knock. But not at the front door this time. This one came from the side of the house. Closer. Louder. It was a single hard knock right beneath her bedroom window. She sat bolt upright in bed. Her hands instinctively pulled the covers up to her chest as if they could protect her. She didn't dare move for several seconds, heart pounding in her ears. After a moment, she stood slowly, crossed the room in 3 careful steps, and looked through the slats of the blinds. No one. She opened the window, trying to see the side of the house better, but the porch light didn't reach that far. Everything beyond the edge of her flower bed faded into pitch-black darkness. She leaned out just a little, still nothing. The wind rustled a bush nearby, and she immediately pulled herself back inside and slammed the window shut. She locked it. Then she locked all the other windows. She checked every door. She turned on every light. The whole house felt like it was shrinking in around her. The walls seemed thinner. Every sound felt amplified. She called her friend Jackie, who lived in the city. Jackie answered groggily. Em, what's wrong? I think someone's outside, Emily whispered, her voice shaking. Did you see someone? No, I heard knocking at the front door and now under my window. Jackie paused. Did you call the police? No, I didn't see anyone. They'll think I'm nuts. Jackie sighed. You want me to come over? Emily hesitated. It's like a 40-minute drive. I don't care. Emily looked at the clock. It was 1:43 a.m. If you could just stay on the phone with me for a while, that'd help. And Jackie did. For about 20 minutes, they talked quietly. Jackie kept trying to convince her to call the police, and Emily kept brushing it off. But then Jackie suddenly went quiet. Jackie? Nothing. Hello? Just the faint sound of static. Emily checked the phone. The call had dropped. She hit redial. No signal. She looked at the corner of her phone. No bars. That had never happened before. She was right outside the city. Cell reception had always been good. Her stomach dropped. She went into the hallway and opened the Wi-Fi settings. The network was gone. Her router was off. She walked toward the small utility room where the router sat on a shelf. The door was cracked open, though she had closed it earlier. She stepped inside. The plug had been pulled. Someone had been inside. Her body went ice cold. She ran into her bedroom and grabbed the small bat she kept under her bed. She had laughed when she bought it, calling it her single girl protection bat. But now, gripping it in her hand, it felt like the only real comfort she had. She crept slowly through the house, switching lights off as she went. She peered through each window, afraid to see someone, but more afraid not to. As she passed by the back door, her eyes caught something. Movement. Not just movement. A face, pressed up against the glass. It was there for only a second, just long enough for her to register the pale shape and dark eyes before it darted out of view. She screamed. She ran back to the bedroom, slammed the door, locked it, pushed her dresser in front of it, and curled up in the closet. She tried to call 911. Still no service. She stayed in that closet for what felt like hours, bat gripped tight in her shaking hands, that breathing through her mouth to stay quiet. Her ears strained to catch every creak of the house, every whisper of wind. At one point, she swore she heard someone walking slowly across the living room. Heavy, slow steps, deliberate. Then the faint sound of her bathroom faucet turning on. It ran for maybe 10 seconds, then off. She didn't know what that meant. She didn't want to know. At some point, she must have blacked out, whether from exhaustion or fear, she didn't know. When she opened her eyes again, light was bleeding in through the slats of the closet door. Morning. She uncurled her stiff legs and pushed open the door. The bedroom was quiet. She moved the dresser and opened the door. The house looked normal. The front door was locked. The windows were shut. The kitchen was fine. The bathroom was quiet, but the utility room door was open again. And on the floor, in the middle of the hallway, was her router. Not just unplugged, but smashed, as if someone had stomped on it. She didn't even bother cleaning up. She drove straight to Jackie's place and didn't come back until 3 days later with 2 friends. They helped her search the property. That's when they found the footprints. In the flower bed under her bedroom window. And more behind the house. But the most terrifying discovery was in the crawl space. Whoever had been outside wasn't just looking in. They had been under the house. Living there, a blanket. Empty food wrappers, a small, grimy knife, and most chilling of all, dozens of blurry Polaroids of Emily sleeping. Different nights, different clothes, different positions, some taken from outside the window, some taken from inside the house. The police never found the person. They said it was probably a drifter or someone who'd seen her moving in and targeted her. Emily moved out 2 weeks later. She doesn't live alone anymore. Sometimes if she's in bed and hears a creak, her heart will still stop. She doesn't sleep near windows anymore, and she always keeps her phone, her bat, and her keys right next to her bed, because she's never forgotten the feeling she had when she looked through that back door and saw the face staring in, the feeling that someone didn't just want to scare her. They wanted in. Story the end. It was late October when I moved into the old house on Pine Hollow Road. I had just gone through a messy breakup and needed to get away from the city, the noise, and the constant reminders of everything that had fallen apart. The place was a rental, 2 stories tall, with peeling white paint, crooked shutters, and a porch that creaked under your feet. It had been empty for a while, but the rent was cheap and the landlord didn't ask many questions. That suited me fine. All I wanted was quiet. The house sat at the edge of a patch of woods, dense and thick with trees that stretched behind the property for what looked like miles. There were no nearby neighbors. The only signs of life were the occasional squirrel and the odd deer that wandered out into the yard early in the mornings. I spent the first few weeks settling in, getting used to the stillness. At night, the silence was deep, like a vacuum, and I wasn't used to it. I'd grown up with sirens and traffic outside my window. Out there, even the rustle of leaves seemed too loud. It started slowly. One night I was up late, reading in the living room when I thought I saw someone outside the window. It was just a flicker of movement, like a figure passing by in the periphery of my vision. I got up, turned on the porch light, and looked outside. There was nothing but the swing swaying slightly from the breeze and the long, dark line of the trees. I told myself it was probably the shadow of a tree or an animal moving past, but my heart was thudding. A couple of nights later, it happened again. This time, I heard the creak of the porch steps. Not the house settling. I know what that sounds like. This was the deliberate groan of wood under pressure, like someone was slowly stepping onto the front porch. I stood up quietly, my book sliding off my lap, and listened. Another creak. Then silence. I tiptoed to the door and looked through the peephole. The porch light was off. I was certain I had left it on. I flicked the switch a couple times, but it didn't come back. I held my breath and waited. No more footsteps. No knocking. Just silence. Eventually, I went back to bed, telling myself it was just the wind or maybe an animal. But I pushed a chair under the doorknob before I went to sleep. The next morning, I found something in the yard. A footprint. It was faint but unmistakable in the patch of mud near the edge of the trees. A bare foot, no shoe tread, just the deep imprint of toes and a heel. I stood there for a long time just staring at it, like maybe it would change into something else if I blinked enough. It didn't. I measured it with my own foot. Bigger, longer. Definitely not mine. I didn't call the police. What would I even say? That someone might have been standing in my yard in the middle of the night? With no lights, no footage, no evidence, it felt thin. I decided I would just be more careful. I bought motion sensor lights, put them on the corners of the house, and set up a cheap security camera by the front door. That night, the camera went dead. It had been working earlier. I double-checked everything, even put in a new SD card. But when I checked the footage the next morning, the video cut off at 2:12 a.m. Then nothing. Just static until the morning. I checked the settings, the power source, everything. All fine. No reason for it to shut off. But it did. Right in the middle of the night. Then things started happening inside the house. I'd wake up to find the closet door wide open when I knew I'd closed it. Lights would be on when I got home from work, lights I hadn't touched. The faucet in the kitchen would be dripping when I swore I'd turned it off tight. And every now and then I'd hear a soft tapping sound, like fingertips brushing the glass of the windows. It was always just faint enough that I could convince myself it was nothing. But one night I couldn't explain it away. I had been having trouble sleeping and was dozing off on the couch in the living room with a mug of tea in my hand. The clock said 2:47 a.m. when I heard it. The doorknob turning. Not shaking. Turning. Slowly, deliberately. I froze. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the house settling. It was metal moving. I got up, grabbed the baseball bat I kept by the fireplace, and crept toward the door. The knob stopped turning, but I could hear breathing. On the other side of the door. Not loud, but real. Human. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely hold the bat. I didn't open the door. I stood there until the breathing stopped and the silence returned. Then I backed away and sat in the kitchen with all the lights on until sunrise. I moved a table in front of the door the next day. Later that week, I had to work a late shift at the store. I got home around 11:30 and found the door slightly open. The table I'd pushed in front of it had been moved. Not completely, but just enough that it was crooked. Nothing was missing. Nothing was broken. But I found a single black thread on the floor just inside the door, like from the hem of a coat. I didn't own anything like that, and it was too thick to be from my clothing. I changed the locks the next day. All of them. That night, just after 2 a.m., the lights went out. I looked out the window. The rest of the street, what little I could see of it, still had power. The motion lights I'd installed were dead. The only light was from the moon. I grabbed my flashlight, walked through the house, checking the windows and doors. Everything was locked. But when I got to the back window, I saw it. A figure standing in the yard. Not moving. Just standing. Watching the house. It was tall. Very tall. Dressed in black. I couldn't make out a face. Just the silhouette. It didn't flinch when my flashlight hit it. Just stood there, still as the trees. I didn't go outside. I closed the blinds. I locked the bedroom door and sat on the floor with the flashlight in my lap until morning. When I dared to look outside, there was nothing there. No footprints. No sign of anyone. I started looking into the house's history after that. Turns out a man named Richard Henley had lived there 10 years before me. Loner. Quiet. Worked from home. No friends or family nearby. He'd filed several police reports about someone lurking outside his house, knocking on the doors, leaving muddy footprints on the windowsills. They found him dead in the upstairs bedroom. Heart failure, they said. But there was no sign of struggle, no medical history of problems, no explanation. Just dead. Lying in bed with the lights still on and the closet door wide open. I moved my bed into the downstairs guest room. A week later, I saw the figure again. This time, it was closer. right up at the window, staring in. I turned off the lights and sat on the floor, hidden behind the couch. My phone was on the charger in the kitchen. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I watched as the figure slowly raised its hand and pressed it to the glass. 5 long fingers, smudged and pale. Then it whispered. I didn't hear words, just a soft hissing sound, like breath through teeth. My ears rang from the silence after. Then it was gone. The next morning there was a smear on the window, like ash or soot. I tried wiping it, but the print remained faintly visible no matter how hard I scrubbed. I left the house that day. I packed a bag, took the essentials, and stayed with my coworker, Jess, for a while. I told her I was having trouble with the plumbing. She let me sleep on the couch. A few nights later, I got a call from the landlord. He sounded tired, nervous. "You still have the keys?" he asked. "Yeah." There was something reported. Someone said the back door was open. No one should be there. "I know. Just, if you go back, be careful." I didn't go back, not for weeks, but curiosity got the better of me. I had to see for myself. I returned during the day, middle of the afternoon. The house looked normal, quiet. But when I stepped inside, something felt off. The air was heavier, like the air before a thunderstorm. The back door was closed, locked even, but every window curtain had been drawn open. Every light was off, and on the mirror in the hallway, someone had written 3 words in the dust. "Someone's outside." I turned and left. I never went back again. I hired someone to move the rest of my stuff out. I never saw who did it. Paid through an app. Gave instructions not to enter after dark. Now I live in an apartment on the 3rd floor of a building in the middle of the city, surrounded by people, traffic, noise. But some nights, just before 3 a.m., I wake up to the sound of knocking. Slow, deliberate. And sometimes when I draw the curtains open, I see a shadow standing beneath the streetlight, watching, waiting. Story the end. It had been a quiet October until the night Erin started leaving the porch light on. She had moved into the house in late summer, a little 2-bedroom bungalow on the edge of a sleepy town in upstate New York, the kind of place where people still waved at each other from their porches and grocery clerks asked about your day. Erin had been living alone since the breakup, and she welcomed the peace and quiet. At first. The first week in the house passed without anything unusual. She'd spend her evenings reading or watching reruns on a little flat screen in the living room. She worked remotely for a publishing company, which kept her mostly indoors during the day. The house was old but solid. No creaks that weren't earned, no signs of mice or bugs. But things changed one night around 11:45 p.m. when she heard a single tap on the front window. She was sitting on the couch in her pajamas, nursing a cup of peppermint tea. The sound made her freeze. It hadn't been loud, but it was sharp, precise, not wind, not a tree branch, a tap. Erin turned her head toward the window next to the couch. The blinds were half drawn, but she couldn't see anything through the gaps. The porch light was off. The night outside looked too still, no cars, no crickets, just that oppressive quiet that made the darkness feel alive. She stood slowly, took a few steps to the window, and used 2 fingers to pull the blinds apart just enough to see out. No one was there. She waited a few more seconds before letting the blinds fall back into place. She told herself it was nothing. A creak from the house settling, a bird, maybe even a weird echo from the TV. She left the porch light on that night when she went to bed. The next day, she barely thought about it. It wasn't until after midnight, while brushing her teeth, that she noticed the front porch light flicker twice and go out. Just 2 little flashes. Blink, blink, then darkness. Her toothbrush stopped mid-brush as she stared at the mirror. The power was still on. The bathroom light didn't flicker. Neither did the hallway lamp. She walked to the front door and opened it slowly. The porch light bulb was still there, but no glow. The switch inside had definitely been on. She stepped out, looked around. The air was sharp with autumn cold, and the scent of damp leaves hung low. Nothing moved. She screwed the bulb tighter, flicked the switch off and on. Nothing. Dead. Erin locked the door and went to bed, but she didn't sleep much. Around 3:30 a.m., she heard it again. Tap. This time from the back of the house. Her bedroom was near the rear, and her window faced a small fenced-in yard. She sat up in bed, heart knocking against her chest. Tap. She reached for her phone and flipped on the flashlight, aiming it at the window. The curtains were drawn, but the light illuminated only the soft folds of fabric. Slowly, quietly, she got out of bed and tiptoed to the window. She held her breath and pulled the curtain aside. The yard was empty, but the gate at the far end, the one that usually sat latched shut, was wide open. She closed the curtain, locked her bedroom door, and didn't move until morning. By daylight, she walked the yard, examined the gate. No footprints, no markings, nothing. She texted her brother Aaron, who lived an hour away. "You ever get that weird feeling someone's outside your window at night?" He replied, "What the hell?" "No." "Why?" She didn't elaborate. She felt silly even typing it. She convinced herself maybe she hadn't latched the gate properly when she mowed the lawn last weekend, but 2 nights later, it escalated. It was just after 1 a.m. She had finally fallen into a decent sleep when she heard the front porch boards creak. Her eyes snapped open. It was unmistakable. Someone was on the porch. She lay perfectly still, barely breathing. Another creak. She slipped out of bed and grabbed the flashlight again. This time, she didn't turn it on. She crept slowly through the hallway to the front room. The porch light was still out. Her fingers brushed the wall for the switch out of habit. She flicked it, and the bulb popped back on. She peeked through the peephole. No one. But as she stared through it, something moved just beyond the edge of vision, just past the front steps. She opened the deadbolt slowly and cracked the door just an inch, flashlight still in hand. Nothing but the cold and the faint smell of wood smoke in the air. She aimed the flashlight across the yard, past the hedges. Nothing. Then, on instinct, she turned it toward the side of the house. And there it was, a figure, standing at the far edge of the fence. Still, motionless. A tall silhouette, barely distinguishable, standing under the maple tree with its last dying leaves shivering in the breeze. She gasped and slammed the door. Heart racing, she leaned against it, locked it again, then ran to the back door. Locked. Deadbolted. She checked every window, everything shut, everything locked. She didn't sleep the rest of the night. By morning, whoever it had been was gone. But they had left something behind. On the porch steps sat a single muddy footprint. Barefoot, no shoe tread, just a long human print. She called the police that afternoon. A young officer came by, looked around, took a few photos, asked a lot of questions, but there were no fingerprints, no damage to the property. He told her to keep the doors locked and let them know if anything else happened. That night, she asked her brother to come stay. He drove up after work and slept on the couch. Nothing happened. No sounds, no knocks, no shadows. They chalked it up to an isolated incident. Maybe some drifter, maybe someone from town messing around. But after Aaron left the next day, it started again. 3 knocks on the back window just after 2 a.m. She screamed this time. She couldn't help it, and she ran to the bedroom door, locked it, and called 911. But by the time they arrived, the yard was empty. Again, the back gate was wide open. The next few days were quiet. But Aaron stopped sleeping. She kept the TV on all night for background noise. She drank too much coffee. Her hands trembled. She jumped at every creak in the floorboards. Then came the night she found her name written on the glass. It was a cold Thursday. The windows were fogged over with condensation. She'd boiled water for tea and was getting ready to call it a night. As she passed the front window, something caught her eye. In the condensation on the outside of the glass, someone had written one word with a fingertip. Aaron. She dropped the mug. It shattered across the hardwood floor. She backed away, then sprinted to the back room and locked herself inside. She didn't call the police this time. She knew it wouldn't matter. She texted her brother again. "Please come stay. Something's wrong. Something's really wrong here." He replied instantly. "I'll be there tonight. Leaving now." He arrived just before midnight. Aaron didn't tell him everything. It just showed him the window. He stared at it, pale. "That wasn't you messing around?" he asked. She shook her head. "Why would I write my own name on the outside?" They stayed up watching TV in the living room, every light in the house on. Around 2:40 a.m., there was a sharp knock on the side door. Aaron flinched. Aaron stood up slowly. "Stay here," he said. "No, wait," she whispered. "Please don't open it." He nodded. Instead, he crept to the door and looked through the small pane of glass. Nothing. Then the door handle moved, gently. Testing. Aaron's eyes widened. He backed away slowly, grabbed his keys and phone. "We're leaving. Now." They left that night, stayed in a motel 15 minutes away. Her brother had to talk her down from shaking. She cried for an hour in the hotel bathroom. They returned the next morning to get some clothes and essentials. The door was locked, nothing broken, but on the front porch, etched into the wood with something sharp, was one word: inside. She never went back. Her brother helped her break the lease. They packed her things in one day during daylight with two of his friends. She moved into a second-floor apartment closer to Albany. For a few weeks, things felt normal again, until one night, just after 3 a.m., when her phone buzzed. She opened her eyes groggily and saw a text from an unknown number. "I saw you move. Nice view." She sat up, her skin crawling. Her apartment had no balcony, just a small window overlooking a narrow alley. She walked to it slowly, every step feeling heavier than the last. She pulled back the curtain, and down below, in the alley, was a figure, still, looking up, not moving, just watching. She moved the next week. Erin doesn't talk about what happened anymore. She tells people she just prefers upper floors now. No yards, no porches, no windows facing trees. And she always checks the curtains every night. Story the end. I was living alone at the time in a small one-story house just off a gravel road in northern Wisconsin. It wasn't exactly isolated. There were other homes along the road, but they were spaced out, surrounded by thick patches of trees that seemed to breathe in the dark. At night, even with my porch light on, the woods would swallow most of the view. I'd moved there after getting promoted to manage the local hardware store. It wasn't a dream job, but it paid well enough, and I liked the quiet. The place had a certain charm to it. Worn floorboards, a wood-burning stove, and a deep front porch with a creaky swing. It was the kind of home you could drink coffee in while listening to the birds and forget about everything else. My dog, Boone, a big shaggy mutt with an overly protective streak, was usually the first to notice anything unusual. He'd bark at deer, raccoons, the occasional mail carrier who dared approach. But one night in early October, Boone didn't bark. He whimpered. I had just turned off the TV and was locking the front door when I noticed him standing in front of the window. He wasn't growling, which he usually did at night, animals. He was just standing there, stiff, ears forward, staring out the front window with that low whine in his throat. The porch light was on, but I couldn't see anything from inside. Thinking maybe there was a coyote or something, I opened the front door and stepped out, flashlight in hand. The air was cold enough to make my breath visible. Boone stayed inside, refusing to step past the threshold, which was unusual for him. I scanned the yard, then the trees. Nothing. "Hey," I called out, just to be sure. "Anyone out there?" Silence, except for the rustling of leaves and the distant creak of the swing swaying in the breeze. I stayed out there for another minute before heading back in. I figured Boone was just being weird. Dogs have instincts, but sometimes they just sense the wind. I locked the door again and went to bed, but I couldn't shake the unease. I woke up around 2:30 a.m. and realized Boone wasn't in the room. He always slept by my bed. I got up, walked down the hall, and found him sitting at the same window, silent, watching. The next day, I installed a motion sensor light on the side of the house, just in case. I also checked all the windows and locks. Everything was secure. That night was quiet. The next night wasn't. I was woken up again around 3 a.m., this time by the sound of the side gate squeaking open. I sat up in bed, heart pounding. The motion light clicked on, flooding the side yard with harsh white light. Boone was already at the window, tail straight, body tense. I crept to the kitchen and peeked out the side door. I couldn't see anyone, but I heard it. Footsteps on the gravel. Slow, steady. I killed the inside light and looked through the front window. The motion sensor didn't reach that far, but the porch light was still on. Someone was standing at the edge of my yard, just standing there, barely visible behind the thin fog drifting off the grass. A tall man in what looked like a dark coat or hoodie. I couldn't see his face. He was just outside the glow of the light, far enough that I couldn't make out features, but close enough to know he was staring at the house. I froze. Boone let out one low growl. The man didn't move. I grabbed my phone and called the sheriff's office. The dispatcher said she'd send someone out right away. It took them about 20 minutes to arrive. When the cruiser finally pulled into my driveway, I stepped outside, the beam from the flashlight in the deputy's hand cutting through the night. No one was there anymore. We walked the perimeter, checked the gate, the yard, the woods. Nothing. Not even footprints in the gravel. "You're not the first to call," the deputy said. "Had a couple others down this road mention someone watching their homes the past few weeks. Probably some vagrant. But we'll keep an eye out." That didn't make me feel better. For a few days after that, nothing happened. I stopped waking up in the middle of the night, and Boone seemed more relaxed. Then one night, while I was brushing my teeth, I heard the screen door on the back porch creak open. Boone bolted toward the back door, barking like crazy. I dropped my toothbrush and followed, heart hammering. By the time I got there, the screen door was wide open, but no one was outside. I installed cameras the next day. They weren't the high-end kind, but they were good enough, motion-activated, night vision, synced to my phone. I placed one on the front porch and one covering the backyard. That night, the cameras were quiet. The following night, around 3:12 a.m., I got an alert. Camera 1. Motion detected. I opened the feed and froze. The figure was back, standing at the far end of my front yard, just like before, still as a statue. But this time, he was facing directly at the camera. No movement, just standing there. I watched for several minutes. He didn't move. Then the feed cut to black. I thought it was a glitch, but when I checked the next morning, the lens was smeared with something, mud or ash, maybe, but it had been wiped deliberately. Like someone dragged their fingers across it in wide circular patterns. The back camera was also covered. I should have left then, but I didn't. Instead, I doubled down. More lights, more locks, a bat beside the bed. I started sleeping during the day and staying up all night, watching the camera feeds, listening. 3 nights later, he got closer. Camera 2 went off first. Backyard. I checked the feed. Nothing at first. Then movement near the tree line, a figure stepping out from behind a tree. He didn't walk, he seemed to glide. No bounce in his step, no shift in weight, just slow, steady forward movement. He stopped at the edge of the yard. Camera 1 went off next. Front yard. Seconds later, he was standing by the porch, right beneath the light. For the first time, I saw his face. Only there wasn't one. Or maybe there was, but it didn't make sense. It was wrong. Distorted, too long, like a stretched mask with shallow pits where eyes should be. No lips, just a smoothed over blankness where a mouth should have been. Then he tilted his head slow like a puppet jerked on a string and waved. The camera feed froze. I jumped up, heart pounding, and turned on every light in the house. I couldn't breathe. Boone was barking so hard he was coughing. I didn't open the door, didn't even approach the windows. Eventually, he left. I know because I watched the footage the next morning. After the freeze, the video picked back up, and he was gone. No retreat, no sound, just vanished. I called the sheriff again. They sent someone new, an older deputy who didn't try to play it down. "Been a lot of weird calls lately," he said, eyeing the woods. "If I were you, I'd think about staying somewhere else a while." I asked him what he meant. He just shook his head and said, "Some folks say this land was cursed before there were houses here. Old stories. I don't buy it, but you never know what's out there." I didn't want to believe that. I didn't believe in ghosts or curses or whatever else he was hinting at. But I did start sleeping at a friend's place a few towns over. I couldn't keep waking up like that. I was starting to feel like I was unraveling. But curiosity is a dangerous thing. A week after staying away, I returned one afternoon to check on the house. It was broad daylight, sunny, birds chirping. Inside, everything was as I'd left it. Until I went to the bedroom. The word "hello" had been written on the inside of the window, scraped into the fog of condensation that had built up from the cold. But the house had been locked. The window sealed. No sign of forced entry. I packed a bag and left without even shutting the door. I haven't gone back since. Sometimes, around 3 a.m, the cameras still go off. The alerts still come. Motion detected, front yard. When I check the feed, there's nothing, but sometimes if I watch long enough, I'll catch the swing moving, or a shadow shift near the trees. And on 3 separate occasions, the word "hello" appeared again, not scratched in, just there. On the feed. Lingering long enough for the motion sensors to catch. The house is empty now, but someone's still outside. Story the end. The first time I noticed something was wrong was about a week after I moved into my new apartment. It was a small 1-bedroom on the 2nd floor of an old building in a quiet neighborhood. I had taken the place because it was affordable and close to work. The neighborhood was peaceful during the day, with kids playing on the sidewalks and neighbors tending their gardens. But nights were something else entirely, still and unnerving in a way I couldn't quite explain. I arrived in the late afternoon, hauling boxes up the creaky stairs. The landlord, an older man named Mr. Whitman, had handed me the keys and mentioned in passing that the previous tenant had left suddenly, citing personal reasons. He didn't elaborate, and I didn't ask. I was just eager to start fresh after a rough breakup and a job change. The first few nights were typical. I unpacked, watched some TV, and went to bed early, tired from the move. The building was old, so I heard the usual creaks and groans from the floorboards settling, the pipes shifting, and the occasional sound of rats scurrying in the walls. Nothing I hadn't expected. Then, on the seventh night, around midnight, I woke to the sound of something tapping. Slow, deliberate taps on my living room window. My apartment faced the back alley, where an old maple tree cast long shadows against the dim streetlights. I thought maybe it was a branch brushing against the glass because of the wind, but the taps were too rhythmic. I sat up and strained my ears. "Hello?" I called softly, thinking someone might be playing a prank, but the tapping stopped immediately. I waited, holding my breath, but no one came forward. I told myself it was nothing. A couple of nights later, the taps returned. This time, they were at the front door. 3 firm knocks, spaced evenly. I froze, my heart pounding. I wasn't expecting anyone. The building's front door was usually locked at night, and no one had a key except the residents and the landlord. I peered through the peephole, but all I could see was darkness. "Who is it?" I asked, voice shaking. No answer, just silence. The next morning, I found the porch light broken. It had been working fine the night before. I made a note to call the landlord. That day at work, I couldn't focus. The knocking, the silence, the broken light. It all weighed on me. I tried to brush it off, but that night the sounds came back, louder and more persistent. It wasn't just knocking anymore. I heard soft footsteps pacing outside my door, slow and methodical. Sometimes a faint whispering that seemed to call my name. Beth. The name sent chills down my spine. I didn't tell anyone at work. I didn't want to seem crazy. I started sleeping with the lights on and the phone beside me, ready to call 911. The police told me they'd increase patrols in the area, but nothing changed. Whoever or whatever was outside never showed itself in a way I could see. Just noises, shadows, the feeling of being watched. One night I was lying awake when I saw it, a silhouette standing just outside my window. It was too dark to make out features, but it was tall and still. I blinked, and it was gone. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. Over the next week, the visits intensified. The knocking evolved into banging. The whispering became louder and more urgent. I heard the front door rattle as if someone was trying to open it. Once, I caught a glimpse of a pale face pressed against the glass of my living room window. I changed the locks, installed extra deadbolts, even bought a security camera. The landlord was sympathetic, but insisted he didn't know anything about previous tenants or the building's history. I scoured the internet and local records for any stories about the place, but found nothing. One night, while watching the security footage, my blood ran cold. At 3:15 a.m., the camera recorded a figure standing at my front door. The figure didn't move or knock, just stared. When I zoomed in, the face was indistinct, blurry, but unmistakably human. Then the figure slowly faded away like a mist. I showed the footage to a friend who had some experience with the paranormal. She told me it sounded like a restless spirit, maybe attached to the building or to me. I was skeptical but desperate for answers. The following nights were a blur of fear and exhaustion. The knocks came every hour on the hour, sometimes in sequences of 3, sometimes more chaotic. The whispers got clearer. "Beth, let me in." One evening, as I was cooking, the lights flickered and went out. I stood frozen in the dark kitchen, hearing soft footsteps creeping toward me. My phone was dead. I scrambled for a flashlight and turned just in time to see a shadow vanish down the hallway. I called the landlord the next day and insisted on moving out. He was reluctant but agreed when I showed him the security footage. Packing up was difficult. The apartment felt suffocating. As I carried boxes down the stairs, I heard the knocking one last time, soft, almost mournful. I didn't look back. Weeks later, I moved into a new place across town. It's newer, brighter, and I haven't heard a single knock since. But sometimes when the wind blows just right, I swear I hear faint tapping on my window, and I wonder if it will ever really leave me alone. Story the end. The autumn wind was already whispering its chill through the neighborhood by the time Jenna got home from work. It was early November, and the daylight hours were shrinking fast, leaving her house swallowed in darkness earlier and earlier each evening. Jenna lived alone in a modest two-story home on a quiet street in a suburban neighborhood just outside the city. The neighborhood was safe, or so she always thought, but that night something felt off. Jenna had spent a long day at the office and was looking forward to unwinding. She stepped into the house, dropped her bag by the door, and flicked on the porch light. The soft glow illuminated the entryway and the small front yard, but the street beyond looked darker than usual, shadows pooling in odd places beneath the trees lining the sidewalks. She shrugged it off and closed the door, locking it behind her. Her cat, Milo, greeted her with a soft meow, rubbing against her legs as she headed to the kitchen to make tea. Jenna liked routine, and tea before settling into her favorite armchair with a book was a part of that. As the kettle boiled, she glanced out the window beside the sink. The street was empty, quiet except for the rustling of dry leaves blowing across the pavement. She couldn't shake a sudden prickling sensation at the back of her neck, like she was being watched. Brushing it aside, Jenna poured the tea, took a sip, and settled onto the couch with the book she'd brought from work. The room was warm and cozy with the soft glow of a lamp, but her eyes kept darting to the window nearest the front door. Outside, the darkness seemed to thicken, like it was pressing in closer. Milo jumped off the couch and padded over to the door, tail flicking anxiously. Jenna frowned and set her book down. The cat stared at the glass pane with wide eyes, ears tilted forward. She could just make out a vague shape standing beyond the porch light's reach. The figure was still almost blending with the shadows, but unmistakably human. Jenna's heart skipped. She forced herself to look again. The figure was gone. She breathed out slowly and told herself it was a trick of the shadows, maybe someone walking by on the other side of the street. She closed the curtains, flicked off the lights in the living room, and sat back down. About an hour later, around 9:15 p.m., the knocking started. It was soft at first, a slow tap, tap, tap on the front door. Jenna's breath caught. She wasn't expecting anyone. She peeked through the peephole. Nothing but the empty porch and the dark street beyond. No car lights, no shadows moving. She pulled back and locked the deadbolt again. Tap, tap. The knocking continued, slow and deliberate, and suddenly she could hear a faint whisper on the wind, something almost like a voice, but too low to make out any words. Her skin crawled. She backed away from the door, her eyes searching the windows. Milo hissed and arched his back. The whispering grew louder, weaving with the scratching sound now coming from the porch. The scratching was dry, like nails dragging across wood. Jenna wanted to scream, to run, but her body was frozen. The knocking stopped. Then came a low, slow-breathing sound right outside the door. Jenna's mind raced. Who could it be? What did they want? Was it someone dangerous? She dialed 911 with trembling fingers and whispered to the dispatcher that someone was outside her house. The dispatcher assured her help was on the way. Jenna moved to the couch, clutching Milo to her chest. The cat trembled against her, his purring gone. Minutes passed like hours. Suddenly, the front door handle jiggled. Jenna squeezed her eyes shut. Then silence. No more knocking. No more breathing. When the police arrived, they swept the yard and surrounding street, but found no one. No footprints in the dew-covered grass. No signs of forced entry. Jenna gave a statement, her voice shaky. The officers stayed until nearly midnight before leaving, promising to increase patrols in the area. Jenna locked every door and window, checked the security cameras she'd installed after a recent burglary attempt in the neighborhood, but the footage showed nothing out of the ordinary. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been watching her. She called Mark, her boyfriend, who lived a few towns over, and told him everything. He tried to reassure her it was probably a prankster or an animal, but Jenna wasn't convinced. The next few nights, the sense of unease lingered. Milo refused to sleep inside and would hide under the bed. On the third night after the incident, Jenna woke suddenly around 3 a.m. to the sound of footsteps on the porch. She froze, listening. The footsteps stopped just outside the front door, then a slow, deliberate knocking again. 3 times. Jenna's throat tightened. She didn't answer. Instead, she grabbed her phone and dialed Mark. Mark, something's outside the door again. Please, I don't know what to do. Mark's voice was calm. I'm calling the police now. Stay on the line with me. The knocking continued. Steady, slow, deliberate. Then a voice, barely a whisper, came through the door's crack. Let me in. Jenna shivered. No, she whispered back. The voice repeated, more insistent, please. I just want to talk. The police arrived within minutes. This time they brought flashlights and swept the yard with dogs. Again, no one was found. But when the officers reviewed the footage from the front door camera, they noticed something. A blurry shadow stood there at the edge of the porch light. The figure wasn't fully visible, but the outline was unmistakable. Tall, thin, unmoving. One officer commented quietly, "Looks like a man." Jenna nodded, gripping the phone tightly. Did anyone check the neighbors? Could it be someone living nearby? They did. No one reported anyone suspicious. That night, Jenna slept with every light in the house on. Weeks passed with no incidents. Then, one evening, she came home late after a dinner with friends. She fumbled with her keys and finally got inside. The house felt cold, colder than usual. Milo wasn't at the door to greet her. She called his name, but heard nothing. A shuffling noise came from the kitchen. Jenna's heart leapt. She flicked on the light and saw Milo crouched under the table, fur bristling. On the kitchen window there was a smear, a handprint. Jenna ran to the back door and checked. Unlocked. Her stomach sank. She locked it, then checked every window, all locked. She sat down on the couch, trying to calm down. The phone rang. It was Mark. Before she could answer, a text buzzed on her phone from an unknown number. I'm still here, watching. Jenna's hands shook as she showed the message to Mark over the call. Mark told her to call the police immediately. Jenna did. The police took the message seriously this time and promised to patrol more often. But Jenna's fear grew. She installed extra locks, bought pepper spray, and kept a baseball bat by the door. Then, one night, she woke to the sound of the back door creaking. Her heart pounded. She grabbed the bat and crept downstairs. No one. The back door was slightly ajar. She shut it, bolted it, and noticed footprints outside in the mud beneath the door frame. She called the police again, but after that, the footsteps and knocking stopped. It was as if whoever had been outside simply vanished. Jenna started to convince herself that maybe it had been some troubled person passing by, or worse, a prank, but Milo still refused to go near the back door. One morning, a package arrived addressed to her, but she hadn't ordered anything. Inside was an old black and white photograph of the front of her house. It was taken at night. The porch light was on, and standing just beyond the railing was a shadowy figure. Jenna showed the photo to Mark, who frowned. How did you get this? She asked the delivery man. He said it had come from a local courier, but no sender was listed. That night, Jenna left a note on the porch. Who are you? What do you want? No answer, but when she woke the next morning, the note was gone. Instead, scrawled on the porch in dirt was a single word, soon. Panic set in. Jenna stayed with Mark for a few days. When she finally returned home, the house felt wrong. She kept seeing fleeting shadows out of the corner of her eye. Her phone screen flickered with mysterious texts. She installed a new security system with motion detectors. One night, the alarm went off at 2:17 a.m. Jenna, shaken, grabbed her bat and called the police. Officers searched but found nothing. Later, Jenna reviewed the security footage. She froze. The camera showed the front porch. A tall figure stood just beyond the light's edge, unmoving, watching. Jenna felt tears prick her eyes. She realized she hadn't been crazy. Whatever had been outside that first night, and every night since, was still there, watching her, waiting. She moved out 2 days later, unable to stay. Her belongings packed into her car, she glanced back once. The house was silent. But she could have sworn she saw a shadow in the front window, watching her leave. Story the end. The rain had been falling steadily all afternoon, a relentless gray curtain that blurred the edges of the world outside my small apartment window. I sat curled up on my worn-out couch, nursing a cup of coffee, the warmth a faint comfort against the chill that seeped through the thin walls. My new place was supposed to be a fresh start, quiet, affordable, and tucked away in a neighborhood that wasn't too far from the city, but just far enough to keep the noise at bay. The neighborhood was old, a patchwork of aging houses and apartment buildings built in the 1950s, with narrow streets lined by towering elm trees whose branches clawed at the sky. Despite the steady rain, the streetlights cast long yellow puddles on the wet pavement outside. The only sound was the soft patter of raindrops and the occasional rumble of a distant car. I had moved in just a few weeks ago. The place was cheap and I was on a tight budget, working late shifts at the hospital as a nurse. Most nights, I was too exhausted to notice much beyond the four walls around me. But that night, something was off. Around 11 p.m., just as I was about to drift off to sleep, I heard it. At first, I thought it was the rain, but then came the unmistakable crunch of footsteps on gravel. My apartment faced a narrow alley that led to the back of the building, where a small patch of gravel separated the parking lot from the trash bins. I'd noticed before that people sometimes walked through there to cut across to the main street. But at this hour, and in the pouring rain, I sat up, straining to listen. The footsteps were slow and deliberate, heavy boots dragging through the wet gravel. Then came a soft knock, 3 knocks spaced evenly on the back door. My heart thumped hard in my chest. I wasn't expecting anyone. The back door was old, with a thin glass pane I had covered with cardboard for privacy. I never kept it unlocked. I grabbed my phone and dialed my best friend's number, but no answer. The knocking continued, rhythmic and persistent. "Who is it?" I called out softly, my voice trembling. No response. I flipped on the porch light, hoping to scare whoever was out there. The knocking stopped. For a moment, there was silence, only the rain tapping steadily on the roof. Then a voice, low and hoarse, barely audible over the rain. "Please, let me in." The voice wasn't quite human. It was distant, like it was coming from far away or from underwater. I hesitated, the dread knotting in my stomach. "Who is it?" I whispered. No answer. I backed away from the door, locking it again. The porch light flickered once and went out, plunging the alley into darkness. I sat frozen for a long time, listening to the rain and the distant city sounds. But there was no more knocking. Sleep didn't come easily that night. The next day I told my landlord about the incident. He was a gruff man in his 60s with tired eyes and a gravelly voice. "Probably some drunks," he shrugged. "This part of town gets weird at night sometimes." I nodded, but wasn't convinced. That evening, I made sure to check every lock twice. I turned on every light in the apartment. At 11 p.m. sharp, the footsteps came again. They were louder this time, crunching on the gravel like someone was pacing back and forth. The knocking followed. 3 knocks. Pause. 2 knocks. I didn't respond. Then the voice again, barely a whisper. "Please." I stared out the window, but all I could see was the flickering light of the distant street lamp, throwing shadows into the alley. I grabbed my phone and called the police. When they arrived 20 minutes later, the rain had stopped and the alley was empty. They searched around but found no footprints or signs anyone had been there. "Probably a prankster," one officer said with a shrug. But the unease lingered. Over the next week, the knocking became a nightly occurrence. Each night at 11 p.m., the same slow footsteps, the same knocking, and the same soft, pleading voice. I started to keep a journal, noting down every detail. Sometimes the voice whispered a name, Anna. I had no idea what it meant. One night, I decided to confront whatever was outside. At the first knock, I opened the door a crack, enough to see outside, but not enough to let anyone in. The alley was empty, but then I felt it, a coldness, like a breath of ice on my cheek. A shadow flickered just beyond the porch light's reach. I blinked, and it was gone. My fingers trembled as I shut the door. The next day, I looked up the history of my apartment complex. It had been built on the site of an old farmhouse that burned down decades ago. I found a newspaper article from the 1950s detailing the tragic death of a young woman named Anna Collins, who was found dead in the alley behind what is now my building. She had been missing for days before her body was discovered, and the case was never solved. The thought sent a chill down my spine. That night, I left a note taped to the back door. It read, "Who are you? What do you want?" At 11 p.m., the knocking came. This time, a reply was whispered through the glass. "Help me." I swallowed hard. "Help you how?" Silence. Then, footsteps faded into the night. Determined to find answers, I contacted a local historian who specialized in the town's darker stories. He told me that Anna was believed to haunt the area, trapped by the violence that took her life. Sometimes people claim to hear her footsteps or see her shadow on rainy nights. I didn't know what to believe, but I had to find out. One night, I stayed up with my camera pointed at the door. At 11 p.m., the footsteps came, slow and deliberate. The knocking started, 3 knocks, then a soft sobbing. On the footage, I saw a faint, translucent figure standing just outside the door. Her face was blurred, but the shape was unmistakably feminine. I sat frozen, watching as she raised a pale hand and pressed it against the glass. The next morning, I found a small flower on my doorstep, wilted but freshly picked. No one else was around. From that night on, the presence seemed to soften. The knocking became less frequent, the voice less urgent. One night, the footsteps stopped altogether. I never saw Anna again, but sometimes when it rains and the clock strikes 11, I swear I hear soft footsteps on the gravel and a gentle knocking at my door. I just don't open it anymore. Story the end. The first time it happened, I was alone in the house, and it was late. I'd just gotten home after a long day at work. It was one of those days that wore you down, the kind where everything that could go wrong did, and by the time you stepped through your front door, the only thing you wanted was silence and sleep. The house was small, a modest 2-story in an older neighborhood, with big windows and a front porch that creaked in the wind. I liked it, even if it was a little isolated. I moved in about 6 months ago after breaking off a messy relationship. It was supposed to be a fresh start. That night, I was sitting on the couch scrolling through my phone when I heard it. The knock. A soft, measured knocking at the front door. I froze. It was quiet outside, the streetlights casting pools of yellow on the pavement, the wind barely moving the leaves. The knock came again. 3 slow, deliberate taps. I wasn't expecting anyone, and the time was late, well past 10. My heart skipped a beat. I looked out the window, trying to see who was there. Nothing. No one. Just the dim porch light swinging slightly in the breeze. I called out, "Hello?" But the only reply was silence. I considered ignoring it, thinking maybe it was the wind or a branch tapping, but the sound was unmistakably a knock. I told myself to relax, that maybe a neighbor had lost their keys or was just passing by. I walked to the door, locked the deadbolt behind me, and peered through the peephole. Still no one. I checked my phone. No missed calls, no messages. I even called my boyfriend at the time just to check in and calm my nerves. After a few minutes, the knocking stopped. I told myself it was nothing. I went to bed early, doors locked, windows shut. But the next morning, something felt off. The porch light was shattered. I called the police, but there was no sign of forced entry. No footprints, no prints on the door, nothing. They told me it was probably vandals, kids messing around. But I didn't think it was kids. It was too precise, too intentional. The second time was a few weeks later. I had friends over for a small dinner. We were in the living room laughing, talking about old times. The lights dimmed low. Suddenly, the lights flickered and went out. The backup generator or fuse box, I wasn't sure which, was noisy and old. My friend Mark offered to check it out. I stayed behind, lighting a candle to keep the room softly lit. That's when I heard it again. The knocking, this time at the back door. We live on a corner lot, and the back door faces a narrow alley between our house and the neighbors. It's not a well-used path, and it's fenced off. I froze, this time not sure whether to call out or run. The knock came 3 times again. Slow, deliberate. Mark came back inside, flashlight in hand. "What's up?" he asked. "There's someone knocking at the back door," I said, voice shaking. He looked serious. "No one should be there." We went to the back door. Mark flipped on the porch light, but again, no one. No footprints in the dirt or snow, nothing. The knock had stopped. He locked the door and looked at me. "You sure you didn't hear something else?" I nodded, but the feeling of unease stayed with me. After my friends left, I double-checked every window and door, then locked myself in my bedroom. I tried to ignore the growing knot of fear twisting in my stomach. That night, I kept the lights on. The door locked, but sleep wouldn't come. At about 2 a.m., I was woken by footsteps outside my bedroom window. The footsteps were slow, heavy, deliberate. Someone was pacing back and forth beneath my window. I pulled the covers up over my head and tried to tell myself it was my imagination. But the sounds continued, slow, scraping steps on the gravel beneath the window. I dared to peek out through the blinds. There was a shadow. a figure standing in the faint moonlight, just beyond the window. I could see the outline of a man, tall and thin, but his face was blurred, as if obscured by darkness or fog. I backed away, heart racing, and called 911. The dispatcher told me to stay on the line and that officers were en route. I waited, listening to the footsteps stop, then restart, slower this time. When the police arrived, the figure was gone. They searched the yard and the surrounding area but found no one. One of the officers shone a flashlight on the ground beneath the window. They pointed to something half buried in the gravel, a small, tattered photograph. I picked it up. It was old, maybe from the 1940s or 50s, yellowed with age. It showed a family standing in front of a house, one that looked eerily similar to mine. The officer looked at me and said, "That house has been empty for years, at least in that condition. It was demolished long before this neighborhood was built." I stared at the photo, a chill running down my spine. After that night, I started noticing more strange things. Doors that I was sure I'd locked would be slightly ajar the next morning, lights flickering even when the wiring was new. Cold spots, just a few feet in diameter, that chilled me when I passed through them. Once I woke up to the sound of whispering coming from the hallway. When I got up to check, there was nothing there. Friends stopped coming over because the house always felt off. I began sleeping with a baseball bat under my bed. One evening, after work, I found my front door wide open. I'm certain I locked it that morning. There was no sign of forced entry, no disturbance inside, but the door stood open, creaking in the breeze. I called the police again. They took fingerprints. No matches, no suspects. I started researching the history of the property. It turns out the house I live in sits on land that was once a large farmstead. In the early 1900s, the original farmhouse caught fire under mysterious circumstances. The family who lived there disappeared, and the house was eventually torn down. Neighbors sometimes told stories about strange noises or lights seen near my house at night. I wasn't sure what to believe anymore. One night, during a thunderstorm, the power went out. I lit some candles and sat on the couch, trying to stay calm. That's when the knocking started again. 3 taps. Only this time, the sound came from inside the house, from the basement door. I don't have a basement. I don't have a door leading to one, at least. I grabbed my phone and tried calling 911, but the signal was gone. The knocking grew louder, more insistent. I followed the sound down the hallway. At the end, where there had been only a wall before, a door stood open. Cold air spilled out. I hesitated but stepped inside. It was a narrow stairwell leading down. A basement I didn't know existed. I flicked my phone's flashlight on. The steps were old and rotted, but the light revealed a dusty, empty room below. On the far wall hung an old, faded painting. It was the same family from the photograph. And beneath the painting, scratched into the floorboards, were words. "Help us." I ran back upstairs, locked the mysterious door behind me, and didn't sleep for days. I called a priest, a psychic, even a historian to come see the place. They all said similar things. The house is a conduit, a place where the past bleeds into the present. The family's spirits were trapped here. I started hearing voices, soft, pleading, sometimes calling my name, other times just crying. I wanted to leave, but something kept me here. Curiosity, guilt, fear. One night, the knocking came again, but this time it was on my bedroom window. I opened the curtains slowly. There was no one outside, but the cold spot was back, and I realized something. The knocking never came from the living. It was the dead, the ones stuck outside, wanting in, wanting to tell me their story, wanting me to help them. I don't know what happened to that family. I don't know why their spirits are still here. But I do know this. Sometimes when the night is quiet and the wind stills, you can hear the knocking. Someone's outside. Story the end. The summer I turned 28, I decided to move into an older neighborhood on the outskirts of my city. I wanted a change, something quieter than the bustling downtown apartment I'd been renting, something with character and a little solitude. The house was a 2-story colonial built in the early 1900s, surrounded by towering maples and oaks, the kind of trees that cast sprawling shadows long before the sun dipped below the horizon. It came with a wraparound porch, creaky wooden floors, and enough space to finally set up a small home office. When I first moved in, everything felt right. The creaks and groans of the house seemed normal, part of the charm, I thought. The neighborhood was almost entirely empty after dark, save for the occasional rustle of wildlife or the distant howl of a dog. I spent the first few weeks unpacking, setting up, and enjoying the quiet nights where the only illumination was the warm glow of my desk lamp and the moonlight filtering through the curtains. But that calm didn't last. It started on a Tuesday, just after midnight. I was working late, my computer screen the only source of light in the room. I heard a faint tapping noise coming from the front porch. Not loud, almost like fingers drumming on the wooden railing. I paused, listening. The sound stopped. I told myself it was probably just a branch brushing against the house in the wind and went back to typing. The next night, the tapping returned, this time a little louder, more deliberate. It wasn't random or sporadic like tree branches. It had rhythm, slow, measured taps. I stood up and walked to the window overlooking the porch. The streetlight outside cast a pale yellow circle on the driveway, but there was nothing out there. No cars, no animals, no people. Just the night. The silence was thick, almost oppressive. I pulled the curtains closed and went back to my office, brushing off the unease gnawing at me. But as the week went on, the tapping became a nightly occurrence. Always around the same time, just after midnight. Always just outside my front door. I installed motion sensor lights the following weekend. The lights were old-fashioned, bulky fixtures that bathed the porch in harsh, white glare whenever movement was detected. I hoped it would discourage whatever was out there. It did not. One night, as the clock ticked past 12:15 a.m., the motion lights flicked on. I was awake, sitting on my couch with a book, and I saw it immediately. Standing just beyond the illuminated circle on the porch was a figure. I froze. The figure was tall and slender, draped in a dark, hooded cloak that obscured its face. No features were visible in the shadow of the hood, but I could feel eyes boring into me through the glass. The figure did not move. It simply stood there, unmoving, as if waiting. My heart hammered in my chest. I reached for my phone to call someone, anyone, but as my fingers brushed the screen, the figure vanished. Just like that, no footsteps, no rustling leaves, no sound at all. It was gone. The next morning, I found muddy footprints on the porch steps. Barefoot prints, distinct and too large to be mine or any neighbors. The soil was damp from the recent rain, making the impressions clear. I took pictures but decided not to show anyone. What would I say? There's a hooded figure standing on my porch at night? I feared they'd think I was losing it. Still, I set up a small security camera aimed at the front door. A cheap, battery-operated model with night vision and motion detection. If someone was out there, I wanted proof. That camera lasted exactly one night. When I checked the footage the following morning, the video cut out abruptly at 12:17 a.m. No sign of tampering, just static. The camera showed a brief, flickering image of the same dark figure standing outside the door before the feed went black. I tried to reset the device, swap batteries, but nothing worked. It was as if the figure's presence had caused the camera to fail. For days after, I tried to convince myself that someone was playing a prank on me. A local kid sneaking onto the porch, tapping the rail and disappearing before I could catch them. But the footprints, the broken camera, and the inexplicable feeling of being watched told a different story. One night, I was asleep when I was jolted awake by the sound of my front door rattling. Not banging, not a forced entry, just rattling, like someone was trying to turn the knob. I was alone, or so I thought. I reached for the baseball bat I kept beside the bed and crept toward the door. The rattling stopped as suddenly as it had started. I held my breath and peeked through the peephole. Nothing. The porch was empty, just shadows and the faint glow of the streetlight. I slammed the door shut and locked it, then backed away slowly. My skin prickled. Something was wrong. Over the next few nights, the visits became more frequent. The tapping returned, the door rattled, and sometimes I heard soft, uneven footsteps pacing just outside the house. I installed extra locks, deadbolts, and even a chain lock on the front door. None of it stopped the presence. One night, around 1:30 a.m., I woke to a cold draft brushing over my face. The bedroom window was closed tight, the heater humming softly. I sat up, confused. Then I heard it, a whisper. Faint, breathy, unintelligible words coming from just outside my window. I switched on the lamp and looked toward the glass. No one was there, only the empty porch bathed in moonlight. I closed the curtains tightly, but the whispering didn't stop. It seemed to circle the house, drifting from one window to another. The next morning, I found fresh footprints again, this time on the back porch. They were smeared and dirty, but unmistakable. Bare feet. I called the police. They came and searched the property but found no evidence of forced entry or trespassing. They suggested maybe wildlife was causing noises or that the wind was rattling the doors and windows. I knew that wasn't true. The last straw came one evening when I was home alone. I was cooking dinner in the kitchen when I heard footsteps descending the stairs from the second floor. The house was empty except for me. No visitors scheduled, no guests. I froze, knife in hand. The steps were slow and deliberate, approaching the kitchen. Then a shadow appeared at the doorway. No face, just darkness. I dropped the knife and ran out the back door into the yard. I called a friend to come stay with me. For the next few nights, I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the figure standing outside, watching, waiting. Finally, I contacted a local historian who specialized in paranormal activity. She told me the house had a dark past. Nearly a century ago, a man named Thomas Everett had lived there. He was a recluse, rumored to have been involved in occult practices. Neighbors reported strange lights and sounds coming from the house. One winter, he disappeared without a trace. His body was never found. Some say his spirit never left. The historian advised me to perform a cleansing ritual, something to reclaim the space and drive away lingering spirits. I was skeptical but desperate. The night of the ritual, I lit candles, burned sage, and recited prayers I'd learned from her. The air grew heavy, the temperature dropped, and I felt a presence, cold and watchful. Suddenly, the tapping started again, louder, more insistent. I opened the door. Nothing. But as I closed it, I caught a glimpse of a figure disappearing into the woods. After that night, the tapping stopped. The rattling ceased. No more whispers. The footprints vanished. I moved a few months later. Sometimes in the dead of night, I still wonder if he followed me. If the figure in the dark cloak is waiting just outside my window, tapping on the glass, waiting for me to answer. Story the end. I don't know where to begin exactly. This is the sort of thing I never thought I'd have to tell anyone because it sounds insane, but it happened to me. It's real. I swear on everything. It started one late fall when I moved into an old rental house in a small town outside of Portland. The kind of place where people know each other, but the houses are spaced far enough apart that you can still feel alone. The house was cheap, mostly because it was built in the 1940s and hadn't been updated much. But I liked the charm of it. Hardwood floors, creaky stairs, and a big picture window that faced the front yard and the street beyond. It sat on a quiet, tree-lined road where cars rarely passed, and at night the only sound was the wind and occasional footsteps of people walking dogs or coming home late. I was living alone. My girlfriend had moved out a few months before, and I wanted a fresh start. The house felt peaceful at first, a little isolated, but peaceful. My dog, Max, a black Labrador, was my constant companion. He was calm and alert, but never overly reactive. The first sign something was off was subtle. I noticed Max would sometimes stare out the window facing the front yard, his hackles slightly raised, but when I looked, there was never anything there. No movement, no people, no animals, just the street, empty and silent. One night, I was lying in bed reading when I heard soft scratching sounds coming from outside the front door. It wasn't loud, but enough to make me pause. Max perked up instantly, growling low in his throat. I turned off the reading lamp, held my breath, and listened. The scratching stopped. I told myself it was probably just the wind or maybe a branch scraping against the porch. The house's wooden frame did creak and groan in the cold night air, but Max stayed tense, ears pointed toward the door, not moving. I got up, grabbed a flashlight, and stepped out onto the porch to check. The street was empty, the only light coming from a flickering street lamp 100 feet down the road. No signs of anything unusual, no footprints, no disturbed leaves, just the quiet night. I locked the door behind me and went back inside, but Max refused to settle down. He kept pacing near the window, barking softly whenever I passed by. A few nights later, the feeling came back stronger. This time it was more than just scratching. Around 2 a.m., I woke up suddenly to the sound of footsteps on the gravel driveway in front of the house. They were slow, deliberate steps. the kind you hear when someone doesn't want to be noticed but can't resist making a sound. Max was already awake, his low growl turning into a full bark. I got out of bed and looked through the bedroom window. Outside, beneath the dull glow of the porch light, I saw a shadowy figure standing just beyond the yard. The figure was tall, wearing a dark coat or hoodie, but the light was too weak to make out any details. The person didn't move, just stood there as if watching the house. I swallowed hard, heart racing, and reached for my phone to call the police. But before I could dial, the figure turned slowly and disappeared into the darkness beyond the trees lining the driveway. The police came after I called, but they found nothing. No footprints, no signs of forced entry, no one on the road. They told me to be cautious and suggested I keep the doors locked at night. After that night, I installed a few security cameras around the front and back of the house, motion activated with night vision. I figured if someone was lurking around, I'd catch them on camera. For the first week, the cameras were quiet. Then one night, around 3:15 a.m., I got a notification. Motion detected in the front yard. I opened the live feed and saw the figure standing just at the edge of the porch light. The same dark clothing, the same stillness. The person didn't move for several minutes. Then, slowly, they lifted a hand and waved. It was the most unsettling thing I've ever seen. The figure's face was obscured in the shadows, but their movement was deliberate and slow, almost robotic. The video froze for a moment, then the figure vanished, as if they'd evaporated into thin air. I stared at the screen, unable to look away. Max was growling, his fur bristling. The next morning, I checked the camera lens. It was smudged, smeared with something dark that looked like dirt or ash, wiped in broad, circular strokes. I cleaned it carefully, but felt like someone had touched it. The next night, the footsteps returned, this time on the back porch. I woke up to the creak of the back door screen moving. Max was barking hysterically. I jumped out of bed and rushed to the kitchen window that looked out into the backyard. The motion sensor light flooded the yard, but no one was there. I checked the back door. It was locked tight. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. The strange presence seemed to be growing bolder. I started sleeping with a baseball bat by my bed and kept my phone charged next to me at all times. One evening, a few days later, I was watching the security footage when the figure appeared again, this time in the backyard. I could see them stepping out from behind a tree, moving slowly toward the house, their form almost gliding, not walking. The camera caught their face for the first time. It wasn't human. The face was distorted, stretched in unnatural ways. The eyes were sunken, hollow pits, and the mouth was a blank void, like a mask pulled tight with no features. The skin looked gray and lifeless, almost translucent. I closed the laptop, heart pounding, unable to look at it anymore. The figure lingered near the back door for several minutes, then vanished just as suddenly as it had appeared. I was terrified, but also desperate for answers. I started researching the house and the land it was on. The property had belonged to a family who lived there until the 1970s. According to the town records and old newspaper articles, the family had suffered several tragedies. A child lost to drowning in a nearby river, the husband dying in a car accident, and later the wife mysteriously disappearing without a trace. Locals whispered that the land was cursed or haunted, but no one spoke openly about it. I contacted a local historian who confirmed the house had a reputation for strange occurrences. People avoided it at night, claiming they'd seen shadows moving or heard whispers in the dark. One night, the figure appeared again, this time standing directly in front of the house. I was watching from inside, frozen in place. The porch light flickered and then went out, plunging the yard into darkness. The figure reached out a hand, almost touching the glass of the front window. I swear I felt a cold wave wash over me. Then it was gone. After that night, I stayed with a friend for several days, unable to face being alone in the house. When I finally returned, the feeling was still there, heavy, oppressive, like the air itself was charged with something unseen. I moved out not long after, unable to endure the sleepless nights and the constant fear. The house sits empty now, the windows dark, the yard overgrown. But sometimes, when I drive by at night, I see the porch light flicker on for a moment, and if I watch long enough, I catch a glimpse of that same shadow standing silently just beyond the trees. Someone, or something, is still outside. Story the end. The first time I heard the knocks, I told myself it was just the old house settling. It was late, past midnight, and I was alone in my apartment, the kind of solitude that felt heavier than usual. The apartment was on the second floor of a building from the 1930s. It creaked and groaned like an old ship, and I'd grown used to that. But this was different. I had just moved into the place a week earlier, excited for a fresh start after months of temp jobs and crashing on friends' couches. The neighborhood was quiet, a small, sleepy town that seemed safe enough. The rent was cheap, and the landlord seemed nice enough, a man in his 60s with a gentle smile and a friendly demeanor. I didn't notice anything odd during the day. But nights, well, that was another story. I was lying in bed, scrolling through my phone when I heard it. A knock. Slow, deliberate, 3 quick taps on the front door. My heart jumped. I live alone. There was no reason for anyone to be there. I convinced myself it was probably a neighbor coming by mistake or the landlord checking on the property. I told myself I should get up and check, but after a long day, I was too tired. I stayed in bed and waited. The knocking didn't come again. Eventually, I drifted off. The next day, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. The landlord had been around fixing a leaky faucet and mentioned the old pipes sometimes made noises at night. That seemed plausible. Still, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling the knocking left behind. 2 nights later, it happened again. Same pattern. 3 knocks, spaced out evenly. This time, I was ready. I got out of bed quietly, grabbed my phone, and crept toward the door. Peering through the peephole, I saw nothing. The hallway was empty, silent. No footsteps, no movement. I opened the door cautiously and stepped into the hallway. No one. The corridor stretched out empty in both directions. I looked down. No footprints, no signs someone had been there. I closed the door and locked it, trying to calm my racing heart. That night, I barely slept. The knocks echoed in my mind. Over the next few days, the knocking grew more frequent. Sometimes it happened at the door, sometimes the window. Sometimes it was just a soft tapping, almost like someone was running their fingers over the glass. Other times it was pounding, urgent and forceful. Once I woke to a whisper, so faint I thought I was dreaming, but it called my name. Emily? It was my name, spoken softly, carried on the breeze outside. I sat up and listened. Silence. I told a friend about it, half expecting her to dismiss me as paranoid or stressed, but she looked concerned and suggested I set up a camera. I bought a cheap security camera and pointed it at the front door and the window facing the street. For the first few nights, the camera recorded nothing unusual. No visitors, no animals, no intruders. Then on the 7th night, I checked the footage. At exactly 2:13 a.m., the camera caught a shadowy figure standing at the door. The figure was tall and thin, its face obscured by darkness. It didn't move, just stood there, staring at the door for nearly 5 minutes. Then it faded away, like mist evaporating. I showed the footage to my friend. She frowned. "That's not normal," she said. "It looks like some kind of apparition." I laughed nervously, but deep down I was terrified. From that point on, the disturbances escalated. The knocks would come in strange patterns, sometimes 6 taps, sometimes 9. The whispering grew louder, and I started hearing footsteps pacing just outside my door, even when the hallway was empty. One night, the front door shook violently, as if someone was trying to force it open. I grabbed my phone to call 911, but the screen went black. No signal. I ran to the window and peered outside. The street was empty. No cars, no people, just the flickering street lamp casting long shadows. Suddenly, a cold wind swept through the room, extinguishing the candles I'd lit for comfort. And then I saw it. A pale face pressed against the window glass. The eyes were hollow, black voids staring straight at me. I gasped and stumbled back. The face vanished instantly. I spent the rest of the night huddled in the bathroom, door locked, phone dead, lights off. The next morning, I called the landlord and demanded to know more about the apartment's history. He hesitated, but finally admitted the previous tenant left abruptly, terrified after reporting strange noises and visions. He shrugged it off as stress. I searched the town records and found something chilling. A woman had died in the building nearly 50 years ago. The circumstances were mysterious. Some said she fell from the stairwell. Others whispered about a violent argument. The case was never solved. I started researching local legends and talked to neighbors, but no one would speak about the building's past. It was like the place was cursed or haunted, and everyone was too afraid to admit it. One night, the knocking started again, louder than ever. But this time, it was different. The knocks spelled out a message. 3 knocks, pause, 2 knocks, pause, 4 knocks. I counted and tried to decipher it. It matched Morse code. The distress signal. Panic surged through me. I called my friend, desperate for help. She came over immediately and insisted we perform a cleansing ritual, lighting sage, prayers, anything to push the entity away. We stayed up all night chanting and burning sage. The knocking stopped. For a few nights, silence. But then, the last night I stayed in that apartment, it came back, tapping on the window, whispering my name, scratching the glass. I decided then to leave for good. I packed my bags and left the apartment behind, never looking back. I've moved twice since, but sometimes late at night, I still hear tapping at my window. 3 knocks. Story the end. It was the kind of evening where the sky seemed heavier than usual, a dense cloud cover swallowing what little light the moon tried to cast. The wind whispered softly through the tall pines lining the long driveway, rustling dead leaves across the cracked asphalt. I had just settled into my new apartment after moving to a small town nestled in the Appalachian foothills for work, a fresh start away from the chaos of the city. The apartment was older but well kept. My landlord assured me it was quiet and peaceful, the perfect place for someone who liked solitude. The first few nights passed without incident. I got used to the creaks and groans of the old wooden floors, the occasional scurry of small animals in the attic. I liked the quiet, and the fact that my closest neighbor was nearly a quarter mile away only added to the feeling of peaceful isolation. But on the 4th night after moving in, things changed. I was sitting on my couch, scrolling through my phone when I heard it. The unmistakable sound of footsteps on the gravel outside the front of the building. My apartment faced the road, and the front door had a small window with frosted glass, but enough to make out vague shapes if the porch light was on. I froze. It was late, almost midnight, and I wasn't expecting anyone. I live alone. The footsteps were slow and deliberate, each crunch against the gravel audible and heavy. They stopped just short of the porch, then resumed, pacing back and forth a little. I didn't want to look. I tried to tell myself it was probably a neighbor or a late-night wanderer, but the feeling in my gut tightened. The footsteps stopped again, right beneath the porch light. I must have been staring at the window for at least a minute before I finally worked up the courage to look. At first, all I could make out was a shadow, but then a figure stepped forward. A tall man, dressed in what looked like an old-fashioned dark coat, a wide-brimmed hat shading his face. His features were blurred, like I was seeing him through fogged glass. The porch light flickered, casting his silhouette in a wavering outline. I blinked, and the figure was gone. My heart pounded in my chest. I grabbed my phone to call the landlord, but there was no signal. The town was small and remote. Cell coverage was spotty. I locked the door and pulled the curtains tight, trying to ignore the weight of eyes on me through the glass. The next morning, I tried to shake off the experience as a trick of the light or exhaustion from the move. I asked around the local grocery store about anyone wandering near the apartments at night. No one knew of any such person. In fact, the few people I spoke to seemed surprised at the idea. That night, I made sure to have every light on before I settled in. I double-checked the locks and kept my phone close. Around 11:45 p.m., the footsteps came again. Slow, methodical, like someone trying not to make too much noise but failing. I could hear the soft scrape of boots on gravel, the subtle jingle of something metal. Then a knock. 3 slow, deliberate knocks on the front door. My breath caught. I didn't answer. The knocking came again, louder this time. I peeked through the peephole. Nothing. The porch light flickered and went out. In the sudden darkness, the knocking stopped, but then there was a whisper. So soft it could have been my imagination. "Let me in." I stood frozen, heart hammering, unable to respond. The whisper came again. "Let me in." I grabbed the small flashlight I kept in my kitchen drawer and shone it toward the door. The beam caught nothing but empty air. I locked the deadbolt tighter and backed away. The next morning, I tried to rationalize it again. Maybe some prankster, some drunk passing through, but it didn't feel right. It felt like something else, something older. Curious and a little scared, I researched the area's history. The town had been settled in the early 1800s, and not far from my apartment was an old cemetery that had been closed for over a century. The stories I found online talked about a man who had died tragically near the property, William Harper, a loner who vanished without a trace after a violent storm decades ago. Some locals whispered that his spirit still wandered the woods and roads near the town, searching for something or someone. I didn't believe in ghosts, but I couldn't deny the figure outside my door matched the descriptions people gave of Harper: tall, dark, wearing a hat. That night, I didn't sleep. The knocking came again at midnight, followed by the whisper. I shouted, "Who are you? What do you want?" No answer, just silence and the fading echo of footsteps retreating into the night. Weeks went by like this. Sometimes the knocks came, sometimes just footsteps pacing outside. The strangest thing was that no matter how many times I checked the windows and doors, I never saw anyone leave. The footprints in the gravel outside were always faint and washed away by the morning dew or rain. I started setting up an old security camera I found in the storage closet. It wasn't the best, but it had motion detection. One night, the camera recorded a shadowy figure standing just beyond the porch light's reach. When I looked at the footage the next day, the figure was blurry, but unmistakably there. It didn't move for nearly 15 minutes before fading into the darkness. I called the police once, but they told me they couldn't do much without evidence of trespassing or threats. They suggested it might be a neighborhood prankster, but the area was too remote for such things, they said. One evening, I received a strange note slipped under my door. It was yellowed and looked old, like something torn from an ancient book. It read simply, "I am still waiting." That was the moment I knew it was no ordinary intruder. I contacted a local historian who told me the legend of William Harper in more detail. He had been a recluse who lived near the woods and was rumored to have lost his family in a fire. Some said his spirit never found peace because he couldn't let go. The historian said it wasn't unusual for spirits tied to tragic events to linger near places where they once felt safe or were most unsettled. I wasn't sure whether to believe the historian or not. But the haunting continued. One cold November night, I heard the footsteps again. This time, they were accompanied by soft sobbing. I stood near the door, clutching my phone, ready to call for help if needed. "Please," a whisper floated through the cold air, barely audible. "Please, help me." I swallowed hard and spoke softly. "Who are you? What happened?" The sobbing stopped. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then the whisper returned, a bit stronger. "I'm lost. I can't find my way home." Something in the voice, so desperate, so broken, pierced through the fear. I opened the door a crack. The cold night air rushed in, carrying the scent of wet leaves and earth. I stepped outside, the porch light flickering overhead. There was no one there. Only footprints leading into the woods behind the apartment complex. I followed them cautiously. The deeper I went, the heavier the air became, thick with damp moss and decay. The footprints ended near an old rotting tree. Carved into the bark was a date, 1873. Underneath, the initials WH. My heart pounded. Suddenly, the wind picked up, swirling leaves around my feet. I heard a voice again, clear this time. "Thank you." I turned to see the silhouette of the man I had seen before. His face was clearer now, a gaunt man with sorrowful eyes. He smiled faintly, then faded away like mist in the morning sun. From that night on, the footsteps stopped. The knocks ceased. The whispers fell silent. I never saw the figure again. I never felt watched. Sometimes late at night, I think about that man, William Harper, and wonder if he finally found his way home. Moving to that small town was supposed to be a fresh start for me, but it became a chapter I'll never forget. And the lesson? Sometimes when someone's outside knocking, it's not a threat, it's a plea. Story the end. It was a late October evening when I first noticed the strange knocking. I was living alone in my small rental house on the edge of town, a quiet place where the closest neighbors were a good 10 minutes away by foot. The streetlights flickered intermittently, and the wind stirred the bare branches of the aging oaks that lined the sidewalk. I'd always found comfort in the solitude, but that night it didn't feel the same. I was sitting in the living room, curled up on the couch with a book and a cup of tea. The house was silent except for the occasional creak of settling wood and the muffled hum of distant traffic. Then, just as I was about to close my book, there it was. 3 distinct knocks on the front door. Slow, deliberate. I froze. My first thought was that it was probably one of the neighbors, maybe a delivery or someone needing help. But the time was nearly midnight, and I didn't expect visitors. Cautiously, I peeked through the peephole. The porch light cast a dim glow, but no one was there. The knocking came again, 3 taps, exactly the same rhythm. I stepped back, heart pounding. "Who is it?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. No answer. I checked the windows, empty street, no movement. The knocking stopped. I locked the door, double-checked the windows, and tried to shake off the unease. Maybe a prank? I told myself that, but the cold feeling in my gut didn't fade. That night, I barely slept. The next morning, I found muddy footprints on the porch steps. They looked old, like they'd been tracked through dried leaves and dirt, but I'd cleaned the porch the day before. I called the police, but they said there wasn't enough evidence of trespassing. No signs of forced entry or damage. They suggested it might have been an animal or neighborhood kids. I wasn't convinced. Weeks passed. I tried to ignore the knocking and the footprints. Then, one night, it happened again. This time I was cooking in the kitchen when I heard it. A soft tapping at the back door. The kitchen faces the small fenced backyard which backs onto a thick stand of trees. The yard was fenced and gated, but the gate had a faulty lock. I looked out and saw nothing but the swaying branches. The tapping came again, a slow rhythm. 3 knocks. I called out, but again, silence. A few days later, I woke up to the sound of footsteps outside my bedroom window. The house has 2 stories, and my bedroom is upstairs. I was certain I'd locked all the doors and windows before bed. The footsteps were slow, dragging, almost as if someone was pacing. I pulled back the curtain just enough to see. Nothing. But the cold chill that filled the room was unmistakable. I started installing security cameras around the house. The cameras recorded every night, but no one ever appeared in the footage. No figure at the door, no shadow in the yard, nothing to explain the knocking or the footsteps. One afternoon, while digging through some old boxes in the attic, I found a bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon. The handwriting was old-fashioned, flowing cursive. They were addressed to the previous tenant, dated back nearly 50 years. I sat down and read through them. The letters told a story about a man named Joseph, who had lived alone in the house during the 1960s. He wrote about feeling watched, about strange noises at night and knocking on the door when no one was there. He mentioned an incident where someone knocked 3 times, every night for a week. Then Joseph stopped writing. Curious and unsettled, I looked up the house's history at the local library. The records showed that a man named Joseph had indeed lived there in the 60s. He was found dead in the house in the winter of 1967. The cause was never fully determined, though some said he had died of exposure during a severe snowstorm after he failed to check in with family for days. I felt a strange connection with Joseph. Maybe the knocking was him, trying to communicate, trying to warn. One night I decided to stay awake, waiting. At exactly midnight, the knocking started again, 3 slow taps on the front door. I didn't move at first. Then I opened the door. No one was there, but standing on the porch was a chill so deep I could see my breath. I stepped back inside, shut the door, and locked it. The knocking continued, but now it was coming from the windows around the house. I tried to ignore it, but the knocks moved from window to window, circling the house. I grabbed my phone to call a friend, but the battery died instantly. Power flickered and went out. I was trapped in darkness, alone, listening to the knocking circling my home. Suddenly, a whisper, a faint voice, called my name. It wasn't my imagination. The voice sounded sad, desperate. "Help me," it said. I ran to the door, but it wouldn't open. The knocking stopped. The voice faded. And then silence. The next morning, the power was back on. The door was unlocked. No sign of forced entry. I moved out that week. Years later, I still think about those nights, about the knocking, about Joseph. Sometimes when I'm alone in a quiet place, I swear I hear it again. 3 slow taps, someone's outside, story the end. The first time I heard it, I was sitting alone in my apartment late at night, the kind of quiet that seems almost unnatural. The knocking was soft, deliberate, 3 slow taps against the front door. I had just moved into this place a few weeks prior, a small 1-bedroom on the 2nd floor of an older building. The neighborhood was decent, a little quiet for my taste, but nothing alarming. I worked late shifts at a hospital, so I was usually asleep or out when most people were awake. That night, it was nearly midnight. I had just finished watching a documentary and was about to turn off the TV when the knocking started. 3 taps. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. I grabbed my phone and glanced through the peephole. Nothing. No silhouette, no shadow, just darkness. I whispered, "Who's there?" But there was no reply. I unlocked the door, cracked it open just a little, and peered out into the hallway. The dim corridor was empty, the usual hum of the building's old heating system the only sound. I stepped back inside, locked the door, and closed the curtains. I told myself it was probably some prank or a wrong apartment knock. Maybe a neighbor with a midnight craving for company or an errant delivery that got lost. Still, a knot of unease settled in my stomach. The next night, the knocking returned. Exactly the same. 3 slow taps on the door, no matter what time I tried to sleep. It became a nightly ritual, each time punctuated by that strange silence when I looked outside and saw nothing. I began setting up a camera by the door, hoping to catch whoever was responsible. The footage showed nothing. The building was empty outside. No figures, no shadows, no indication anyone had been near my door. The knocking stopped for a few nights, and I almost relaxed, chalking it up to my imagination or some prankster with nothing better to do. Then came the footsteps. One night, lying in bed, I heard slow, deliberate footsteps pacing just outside my bedroom window. It was on the 2nd floor, and I was certain all windows were locked and latched tight. The footsteps circled the room 3 times and stopped abruptly. I sat up, eyes wide, and grabbed my phone to call the building manager, but the battery was dead. No power outage was reported. The footsteps faded away as mysteriously as they had come. I checked the window. No sign of forced entry or damage. The glass was cold, untouched. But the cold air against my skin told a different story. It was freezing, colder than the autumn air outside. After that night, the knocking intensified. Sometimes it came from the front door, other times from the window beside it, sometimes even the back door. Though my apartment had no direct access to the back outside, only the fire escape. One evening, after a particularly exhausting 14-hour shift, I came home and found muddy footprints on the welcome mat, wet soil, leaves pressed into the fabric. I hadn't seen rain or storms in days, and I was meticulous about cleanliness. The footprints led to the fire escape door. It was supposed to be locked and alarmed. I checked it. No signs of tampering. But the feeling of someone having been there was undeniable. I called the police and the building manager. The police found no evidence of a break-in or suspicious activity. The manager was baffled but promised to increase patrols. That night, the knocking changed. It was no longer 3 taps. Now it was an uneven pattern, sometimes 2 knocks, sometimes 4, sometimes a slow rap followed by a pause and then a single knock. Then came the whispers. I started hearing soft voices outside my door at night, whispering. They were unintelligible at first, just low murmurs that blended with the hum of the city. But gradually I thought I could catch a word here and there. Help, come, don't. I stopped opening the door at night. One night I awoke to a cold draft and saw the curtains beside the door flutter as if someone had brushed against them. I looked outside, but nothing was there. The knocking came, then the whispering, growing louder and more desperate. I was scared. I told a few friends, but they dismissed it. Stress, sleep deprivation, the city's usual noises. But it wasn't normal. One friend, Tom, stayed over one night. Around midnight, the knocking started again. He stood up and opened the door, expecting to find a neighbor or prankster. Nothing. No one. But the porch light flickered, and a chilling breeze swept inside the hallway. Tom slammed the door shut and locked it, visibly shaken. He said, "I felt something, not human." I wanted to believe it was just my imagination. One day, while looking through public records online, I found something chilling. The apartment I lived in had a history. A man had died there 10 years earlier, alone and undiscovered for days. He was elderly, a recluse, much like me. The cause of death was unknown, but rumors said he was found in the hallway near the front door with scratches on his arms and a look of terror frozen on his face. No one ever said what he saw. I started researching other tenants' experiences, finding old forum posts where former residents mentioned strange noises, knocking, and shadows in the hallways. The man, apparently named Harold, had been known to knock 3 times on his own door before anyone ever answered. The police noted it but never connected it to his death. That night, I set a recorder by the door. At midnight, the knocking started again. 3 slow taps, then the whispering. The recorder picked up a faint voice. "Help me." I listened over and over. I knew then it wasn't a prank or wind or a neighbor. It was Harold or something tied to him. One desperate night, I decided to open the door fully and step into the hallway. No one was there. But the air was heavy, thick with sorrow and cold. I called out, "Harold, what do you want?" The hallway was silent, except for the faintest echo of footsteps fading away. That was the last night I heard knocking. I moved out shortly after. I still have the recorder. Sometimes when I listen, I swear I hear the knocks, the whispers, and the cold breath of someone waiting just outside my door. Someone who never got the help he needed. Someone still there. Story the end. The first time I noticed something strange, it was a cold, late October evening. I had just moved into my new apartment, a second-floor unit in a quiet, older building on the outskirts of the city. The rent was affordable, the neighborhood was decent enough, and the commute to work was manageable. I was exhausted from the move, so I spent the night unpacking a few boxes before heading to bed. Around 11:30 p.m., just as I was about to drift off, I heard a faint scratching sound coming from the window. It was soft, almost like fingernails lightly dragging across the glass. I opened my eyes and sat up, listening closely. The apartment was silent except for the occasional hum of the refrigerator and the soft tap-tap of rain against the window. I told myself it was probably just a tree branch scraping against the glass, or maybe some stray animal outside. I tried to ignore it and get back to sleep. The next night, the sound returned, only this time it was more insistent. There was a steady tapping like someone was rapping their knuckles on the window. My heart began to race and I stayed still, staring toward the window but seeing nothing outside. The street was empty, and the faint glow of the street lamp barely reached my apartment window. I pulled back the curtain just a little to peek outside, but the street was deserted. I shrugged it off, blaming my imagination or the stress of the move. Still, the feeling of being watched settled over me like a weight. Over the next few days, the tapping happened nearly every night, always at the same time, just before midnight. Sometimes it was accompanied by soft footsteps on the gravel path beneath my window. I never saw anyone, but the sounds were unmistakably human. One night, I decided to set up my phone to record audio while I slept. I wanted proof that I wasn't just imagining things. The recording captured the tapping, footsteps, and, faintly, what sounded like whispering. The voice was indistinct, like someone speaking too softly to make out the words. Feeling increasingly uneasy, I started locking the window securely, even though it had a latch that prevented it from opening fully. Still, the noises continued. I spoke with the building manager, an older man named Mr. Collins, who told me that a few tenants had reported strange things at night, noises, cold spots, and a feeling of someone standing outside their windows. He shrugged it off, saying the building was old and sometimes creaked in odd ways. One evening, around 1 a.m., I was startled awake by the loud banging on my front door. It was frantic and forceful, like someone desperately trying to get in. I sat up, frozen, listening. The banging stopped abruptly. I didn't dare look through the peephole. I didn't want to see a stranger standing outside. I waited until morning, heart pounding, before cautiously checking the security camera footage. The camera, installed in the hallway, showed the door rattling violently, but no one appeared on the screen. It was as if an unseen force had pounded at my door. The next few nights were worse. The tapping on the window turned into persistent pounding, and the footsteps outside grew heavier. Sometimes I heard whispers calling my name. I couldn't sleep. I felt trapped inside my own apartment. One night, after a particularly loud pounding, I mustered the courage to peek through the window again. Outside, standing just beyond the porch light's dim circle, was a figure. It was a man, tall and gaunt, dressed in old-fashioned clothes, a long dark coat, and a wide-brimmed hat. His face was pale, almost translucent, and his eyes glowed faintly in the dark. He didn't move or speak. He simply stood there, staring up at my window. I gasped, stumbled back from the window, and locked myself in the bedroom. That night, I barely slept. When dawn finally broke, I called a local historian to inquire about the building's past. She told me that the apartment complex was built on land that once belonged to a small rural community, which had largely disappeared in the early 1900s. There were stories about a man named Samuel Reed, who had lived nearby and mysteriously vanished after a fire destroyed his home. People whispered that his spirit was trapped, wandering the streets searching for shelter. The historian warned me to be careful, as spirits attached to places or memories can sometimes become restless or dangerous. Over the following weeks, the entity's presence intensified. The pounding on the door turned into attempts to force it open. The tapping became frantic and frantic scratching. Cold spots appeared in the apartment, and I felt watched constantly. I spoke with friends, but no one believed me. They told me to see a therapist or get some rest. One night, after the worst pounding yet, I called a local paranormal investigator recommended by the historian. He came the next day, setting up equipment and spending the night in the apartment. The recordings picked up strange electromagnetic fluctuations, inexplicable cold spots, and captured the sound of footsteps circling the room, despite no one moving. The investigator said the spirit was likely Samuel Reed, a man tied to the place by tragic circumstances. He suggested a cleansing ritual to help the spirit move on. That night, we lit candles, burned sage, and recited prayers. The atmosphere thickened, the temperature dropped sharply. At one point, the pounding on the door began again, but slowly faded as the ritual progressed. Afterward, the presence diminished. The pounding stopped. The footsteps ceased. I could finally sleep again. But sometimes in the darkest moments, just before dawn, I still hear a faint tapping on the window. And if I listen closely, I think I can hear a whispered, "Let me in." Story, the end. The first time I heard it, I thought it was just the wind. I had moved into my new apartment a few days prior, a small one-bedroom unit on the third floor of an older building in the city. The neighborhood was quiet, mostly families and retirees, and I liked the peacefulness after years of loud roommates and noisy neighbors. The apartment itself was cozy, if a little dated, but it was mine. I was excited for the fresh start. It was late at night, around midnight, when I woke up to a faint sound outside my bedroom window. I live on the corner of the building, so my bedroom window faced the side street, which was usually empty at night. The sound was rhythmic, footsteps pacing back and forth. I sat up, heart already racing, and peered through the thin curtains. The street was dimly lit by a flickering street lamp, and for a moment I thought I saw a figure standing just beyond the pool of light. I blinked and the figure was gone. I told myself it was just a trick of the light or my imagination playing games. The city at night can do that. Shadows shift, shapes blur. I laid back down and eventually fell asleep. The next few nights, the footsteps returned, always between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m., slow, deliberate pacing right outside my window. At times, I heard faint tapping on the glass, like someone trying to get my attention without causing a scene. I began locking the window securely, even though the building was old and the locks a bit flimsy. One night, the pacing stopped, replaced by soft, low whispers. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was urgent, desperate. I sat in bed, clutching my blanket, too scared to look outside. I told myself it was probably a late-night drunk wandering the streets, but something about the sound unsettled me deeply. A week into this, I decided to tell my friend Mark about it. He lived a few blocks away and was the kind of guy who always looked for logical explanations. Maybe someone's homeless and hiding near your place, he suggested, or maybe a prankster. I appreciated his attempt to normalize the situation, but deep down, I wasn't convinced. One evening, I stayed up waiting, determined to catch whoever or whatever was outside. Around midnight, the footsteps started again, slow and heavy, pacing back and forth on the pavement. I grabbed my phone and texted Mark, asking him to come over. I needed company. He arrived within 20 minutes, flashlight in hand. We sat in the living room with the curtains pulled back, eyes glued to the window. The street was quiet, empty, until the sound of footsteps started again. We saw the figure then. A man, tall and thin, wearing what looked like a long coat. His face was obscured by shadows, but I could see the outline clearly as he paced back and forth, never stopping. Mark shined his flashlight toward the street, but the beam passed right through the figure. No reflection, no shadow on the ground, just emptiness. The footsteps continued, but the figure vanished. I rubbed my eyes, thinking I must be hallucinating. "Did you see that?" I whispered. Mark nodded, visibly shaken. We spent the rest of the night searching for any signs of someone lurking nearby, but found nothing. Over the next few days, the strange phenomena escalated. Doors would creak open by themselves, lights flickered randomly, and sometimes I'd catch glimpses of the figure standing silently outside the window, watching. One night, I woke up to the sound of tapping, not on the window, but on the back door, which was several floors below my unit. The building had a shared stairwell that led down to the courtyard, and someone was knocking. Soft, deliberate. I called out, "Who's there?" but got no response. The knocking stopped, replaced by the sound of slow, heavy footsteps retreating into the dark. I called the building manager the next day and asked if anyone had reported suspicious activity. She said no, but she'd check the security footage. A few days later, she called me, her voice strained. "There's nothing on the cameras. No one was near the building at that time." I was frustrated, confused, and scared. One night, unable to bear it anymore, I set up a small camera facing the street outside my window. When I reviewed the footage the next morning, I was horrified. Around midnight, the image showed the outline of the same tall figure pacing back and forth, but with no feet touching the ground. He hovered slightly above the pavement. Then a cold chill ran down my spine as the figure turned its head slowly and looked directly at the camera. Its eyes were hollow, empty black voids. After that, the pacing stopped. The tapping ceased. But the presence didn't leave. I began waking up to cold drafts in the middle of the night, even with windows and doors closed. I heard whispers calling my name, just out of earshot. Shadows flitted in the corners of my vision. One night I woke to the sensation of someone standing at the foot of my bed. I dared not open my eyes. The room was icy cold, and I heard a voice, barely audible, "Help me." I sat up, heart pounding, and the room warmed instantly. I called Mark and told him everything. He suggested we contact a local paranormal expert, a woman named Claire who had helped others with similar experiences. Claire came the next evening, bringing equipment to detect electromagnetic fields and record any unusual activity. That night, the devices registered spikes in EMF readings near the window and the door. We heard footsteps, whispers, and tapping. Claire performed a seance, trying to communicate. After some moments, her eyes glazed over, and she spoke in a distant voice. "There is a soul here, trapped, bound to this place. He means no harm, but is desperate to be seen. Something terrible happened here." She described a man who had died violently on the street decades ago, a man whose spirit could not move on. I researched the history of the neighborhood and discovered that a man named Daniel Reed had been murdered outside that very building 40 years ago. His death was never solved. The footsteps, the pacing figure, the whispers, they were Daniel's spirit, restless and trying to reach out. Claire helped me perform a ritual to try to release the spirit, a process that lasted several nights. Slowly, the cold drafts faded, the footsteps ceased, and the presence lessened. Now the apartment feels peaceful. But sometimes when I sit near the window on quiet nights, I swear I can hear soft footsteps outside. And a whisper, just barely audible, calling my name. Story the end. It began on an ordinary autumn evening, the kind where the sun had just slipped below the horizon, leaving a pale twilight hanging in the air. I had recently moved into a modest two-bedroom house on the edge of a small town, the kind of place where the streets grew quieter as night fell, and neighbors mostly kept to themselves. I was still settling in, unpacking boxes from my last move and trying to get comfortable in a new space that was supposed to feel like home. That night, the air was cool and crisp, carrying the faint smell of wet leaves and wood smoke from nearby chimneys. I was alone. My partner was away for work, and the house had that quiet stillness that comes when the only living thing inside is you. I liked it. I was tired after a long day of work and unpacking, so I made a simple dinner and settled in front of the TV. The low glow of the screen, the only light in the room besides a small lamp on the side table. Max, my golden retriever, lay curled up by my feet, occasionally lifting his head to glance toward the window, then settling back down with a soft sigh. I was just about to start a movie when I heard it. Footsteps outside. At first, they were faint, almost hesitant, crunching softly on the gravel driveway that ran along the side of the house. I paused, listening. The sound was slow and deliberate, and it was definitely someone walking near the back door. I turned to Max, who was now sitting up, ears pricked and eyes fixed on the window. The hair on my arms stood up. I got up and walked quietly to the window, pulling aside the curtain just enough to peek outside. The yard was dimly lit by a single porch light which flickered weakly. The gravel driveway stretched into darkness toward the street, and beyond the chain-link fence the outline of tall oaks swayed in the breeze. But there was no one there. The steps had stopped. The gravel looked undisturbed. I tried to convince myself it was just a neighbor coming home late or maybe a stray animal making noise. Still, I locked the back door again, double-checked all the windows, and closed the curtains. Max stayed close to me, his body tense. The next few nights followed a pattern. Just as I was about to fall asleep, the footsteps would start, slow, careful, pacing back and forth outside my back door. Sometimes there were faint whispers carried on the wind, too soft for me to make out the words. Max would growl low in his throat, pacing along the floorboards near the door. One night, around 1 a.m., the footsteps stopped right outside the door. Then came a soft, persistent knocking, once, twice, 3 times. I held my breath and stared at the door, feeling the cold press of fear tighten my chest. "Who's there?" I asked, my voice shaking. No answer, only the quiet scrape of nails on wood. I gripped the handle, my knuckles white, but I didn't open the door. The knocking stopped. I waited a long time before the footsteps finally faded into the night. Days passed and the occurrences grew more unsettling. I began to notice strange things. Footprints in the dirt near the door, wet smudges on the glass where someone had pressed their hands, even though the windows and doors had been locked tight. Max refused to sleep in the bedroom anymore, choosing to stay by the front door, his body rigid and alert. One afternoon, I spoke with the neighbor who lived across the street, an elderly woman named Mrs. Holloway. She had lived in the neighborhood for over 50 years and was a font of local history. I asked her if she'd heard anything strange or knew about the house's past. She looked at me thoughtfully, then said, "That house has always been troubled. The last family left suddenly years ago. People say they heard footsteps at night, whispers, like someone calling out from the shadows." I frowned. "Did something happen there?" Mrs. Holloway hesitated. "There was a man who lived there before. Quiet fellow. He disappeared one winter, went missing for weeks. Found dead by the creek not far from here. Some say he never really left the house." That night, I felt the weight of her words pressing down on me as I lay in bed. Around midnight, the footsteps returned, heavier this time, more deliberate. They circled the house slowly, stopping beneath my bedroom window. A chill crept through the room. Max growled again, a low, angry sound. Then came the knocking, 3 slow raps like a warning. I sat up, heart pounding, and whispered, "Go away." The knocking stopped. The footsteps retreated. For a moment, silence. But then, from the darkness outside, a whisper, faint but unmistakable, "Let me in." I froze. The next day, I researched the house's history at the town library. I found old newspaper articles about the missing man Miss Holloway mentioned. His name was David Harper. The papers said he had been a recluse, suffering from depression after the death of his wife. His body had been found frozen near the creek, the cause of death listed as exposure. But the last article caught my eye. Neighbors reported strange noises coming from the house after he disappeared, like footsteps and voices calling out in the night. Some thought the house was haunted. That evening, determined to confront whatever was haunting me, I set up a small voice recorder near the back door, hoping to capture evidence of the noises. At midnight, the footsteps began again, circling the house as usual. Then the knocking. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. I spoke softly into the dark. "David, if you're here, I'm not afraid. Please leave me be." The knocking stopped. For the next hour, nothing. But then I heard whispering, so close I could almost feel it brush past my skin. "Let me in." I grabbed Max, feeling suddenly desperate, and ran to my car. I stayed at a friend's place that night. When I returned the next day, the house felt colder, heavier. The back door had deep scratches along the frame, as if someone or something had tried to force its way inside. I decided I couldn't stay. I packed my things, found a new place across town, and moved out. Sometimes late at night, I still hear the faint sound of footsteps outside my window, and I wonder if David Harper is still there, waiting to be let in. Story the end. The late autumn wind whispered coldly through the skeletal branches of the maple trees lining my street. It was the kind of night where shadows seemed to stretch longer than they should, where the silence between the creaks and groans of the old houses felt unbearably heavy. I'd only been living in my small rental for a few weeks, but something about this night felt off, and I couldn't quite put my finger on why. My name is Michael, and I live alone. For years, I'd been in and out of relationships and roommates, but now, finally, I had my own place. It was a modest one-bedroom in a quiet neighborhood on the edge of town, with a little front yard and a porch that creaked just a little too much. The previous tenant had moved out suddenly, the landlord said, but he never gave me any details. I wasn't one to ask too many questions. I liked the house, and the rent was affordable. That night, I had been working late on my laptop, trying to finish a report for work when I heard it, a faint tapping at the front door. It was barely audible over the low hum of my computer fan. I paused, listening intently. Tap, tap, tap. A brief pause. Tap, tap. I froze. No one was supposed to be here, not this late. I live on a quiet street where the occasional car passes, but usually there's no foot traffic after dark. I told myself it was probably the wind or a branch brushing against the wood, but the tapping was too deliberate, too steady. I tried to ignore it, telling myself to focus on work, but the tapping continued, sometimes soft, sometimes louder, always the same pattern. I glanced at the clock. It was 2:17 a.m. Then I heard it, a soft whisper from outside, right by the door. It was so faint that I thought I imagined it at first, but the voice repeated, urgent and pleading. Michael. My heart skipped a beat. How did it know my name? I got up slowly and approached the door, peeking through the peephole. Nothing, just the empty porch swaying under the dull glow of the street lamp. No one was there. I unlatched the deadbolt cautiously and cracked the door an inch, ready to slam it shut if I saw someone. The night air was icy cold, and the porch was empty except for a few dead leaves swirling in the wind. Who's there? I whispered. Silence. I closed and locked the door firmly and went back to my desk, with my hands trembling. The rest of the night passed in uneasy silence, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The next day, I told my coworker Lisa about what happened. She looked at me skeptically, but said, Maybe someone's messing with you? Could be kids playing pranks. I nodded, but couldn't forget the urgency in that voice. That night, I made sure all the doors and windows were locked and even placed a chair against the front door. I told myself I was just paranoid. At exactly 2:17 a.m., the tapping began again. 3 short taps, pause, 2 longer ones, then 3 again. The pattern was the same, unmistakable. Then the whisper came again, clearer this time. Michael, please. My skin crawled. I grabbed my phone to call someone but saw the screen flicker and go black. No signal. I was cut off. The tapping turned into frantic pounding on the door. I backed away slowly, heart pounding, listening to the desperate noise. Suddenly, the pounding stopped. The silence that followed was heavier than before. I sat on the floor, clutching my phone, trying to steady my breath. After what felt like an eternity, I finally drifted into an uneasy sleep. In the days that followed, the noises continued. Tapping, whispering, footsteps pacing the porch outside my bedroom window. No matter how many times I checked, no one was ever there. My locks were intact, no windows opened. Yet the feeling of someone, or something, lurking outside grew unbearable. I started researching the house's history. I discovered that decades ago the house had belonged to a man named Harold Pierce, who had lost his wife under tragic circumstances. She had vanished one stormy night, and Harold was never seen again after that. Some neighbors whispered that Harold had gone mad searching for her, that his spirit might still wander, forever trying to find her. One evening, Lisa came over with a friend who claimed to be a medium. The medium set up candles and began speaking softly, asking the spirit to communicate. For hours, nothing happened. Then, as the clock struck 2:17 a.m., the tapping returned. The medium's eyes widened as she whispered, "He's here. He's angry. He's lost." The tapping morphed into a loud pounding, the house trembling slightly. I felt a cold breeze rush past me, even though all the windows were shut. Suddenly, the front door creaked open slowly by itself. We all froze. The medium called out, "Harold, what do you want?" A voice whispered from the darkness just beyond the door, "Help me. Find her." The door slammed shut with a violent bang. The house fell silent again. After that night, the noises gradually faded. The pounding stopped, the whispering ceased. It felt like something had finally been set free. I stayed in the house a few more months, but I never forgot those nights. Sometimes when the wind is right, I swear I can still hear tapping outside my window. 3 taps, pause, 2 taps. And I wonder if Harold is still out there, searching for his lost love in the dark. Story the end. I remember the first time I heard it. The sound that made my blood run cold. The one that convinced me I wasn't alone in that house. I had moved into the old Victorian on Elm Street about 3 weeks before. It was a fixer-upper, the kind of place that a lot of people would pass over, but I was looking for something affordable, something with character, and it definitely had that. The house creaked and moaned like it had 1,000 stories to tell, and I was determined to add mine. The neighborhood was quiet, maybe too quiet. The kind of silence that makes you hyper-aware of every little noise. On the first few nights, I'd hear the typical old house sounds, the pipes clanking, the wood settling, the wind rattling the window panes. I told myself it was all normal. I wasn't a superstitious person. But then came the footsteps. Always at night, always outside. The first time it was around midnight. I was lying in bed, scrolling on my phone, when I heard a soft crunching on the gravel driveway. At first, I thought it might be a stray cat or a raccoon, but then I realized the steps were deliberate, slow, like someone pacing just outside my bedroom window. I froze, staring at the dark window. The footsteps stopped. Then came a knock. Slow. 3 knocks. I didn't respond. The knock repeated, then footsteps retreated, crunching back down the gravel path. I shook it off. Probably a neighbor or someone lost. I double-checked the locks, but still I couldn't sleep. The next night, the footsteps came again, right at the same time, midnight. Louder this time, and more insistent. The knocking was quicker, more urgent. I got up, turned on every light in the room, and looked through the blinds. Nothing. No one. I even stepped outside to check the driveway. Empty, save for the footprints in the gravel, but they stopped just short of the front porch. It felt like someone was there, watching, waiting. Over the next several nights, the pattern didn't change. Footsteps at midnight, knocking on the door. No one ever there when I looked. One night, I heard something different. A whisper. Soft, almost unintelligible, carried on the wind. It sounded like a woman's voice saying, "Let me in." I stared at the door, heart pounding, but the silence outside was unbroken. That was when I started researching the house. I dug into old property records and newspaper archives, and what I found unsettled me. The house was built in the 1800s by a man named Charles Avery, who lived there with his wife, Elizabeth, and their daughter, Clara. In 1887, Clara went missing one night during a storm and was never found. Rumor had it that Elizabeth went mad with grief, wandering the halls of the house, searching for her lost child until she died years later. Some neighbors still whispered about strange noises at night and unexplained lights in the windows. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe the footsteps were real people, trespassers or vagrants. But the knocking always stopped the moment I tried to confront it. One night, determined to catch whoever it was, I stayed awake with my phone in hand. At midnight, the footsteps came, slow and deliberate. The knocking started. 3 knocks, pause, then 2. I whispered, "Who's there?" The reply was a faint, breathy voice. "Please, help me." I froze. It was impossible, but I felt a wave of sorrow and desperation wash over me. I wanted to open the door, to help whoever was out there, but fear held me back. The voice whispered again, barely audible, "Find me." I grabbed my coat and flashlight and went outside. The rain had started falling lightly, slicking the gravel. I followed the footprints, which led beyond the porch, past the garden stretch, and into the woods behind the house. The trees closed in around me as I moved deeper into the darkness. Suddenly, the footsteps stopped. I shone my flashlight around, but saw nothing. A chill ran down my spine. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a pale figure standing just beyond the trees. She was translucent, her eyes full of sorrow, her dress soaked and clinging to her. "Clara?" I whispered. She nodded, lips trembling. "Find me," she repeated. Then she vanished. I was shaken, but felt compelled to keep searching. The next day, I found an old diary in the attic belonging to Elizabeth Avery. It described her anguish over Clara's disappearance and hinted at a hidden room somewhere in the house where she believed her daughter was trapped. I searched the house meticulously, checking every nook and cranny. Finally, behind a false wall in the basement, I found a small door. It creaked open to reveal a narrow, dust-choked room with faded toys scattered on the floor. The air was cold, stale. I called out, "Clara?" A soft giggle echoed, and the temperature dropped suddenly. I hurried back upstairs and sealed the door. That night, the footsteps and knocking ceased. The oppressive feeling lifted. For the first time since moving in, I slept peacefully. But sometimes, when the wind howls through the trees and the moon is full, I swear I hear soft footsteps outside and a voice calling for help. I'll never forget that desperate plea, and I'll never open that door again. Story the end. It started with the sound of gravel, just a soft crunch, faint, distant, but enough to stir Amber from the shallow edge of sleep. She blinked into the dark, her room barely lit by the pale glow of the digital alarm clock on her nightstand. 2:13 a.m. She held her breath, listening. Nothing. The crunch of gravel was a normal thing. Her house sat on the edge of a large, open property in the outskirts of Fairview. Her parents had moved into the farmhouse 6 months earlier, trading city life for something quieter. Amber had stayed behind for college, but now, on summer break, she was home again, sleeping in the old guest room on the ground floor. Gravel driveways always made noise, raccoons, deer, even the wind. She exhaled slowly and turned over, pulling the thin sheet over her shoulder. Her eyes fluttered shut. Crunch, closer. This time she sat up. The sound came from outside her window, which overlooked the east side of the yard. She reached out, pushed aside the light curtain, and stared out into the darkness. The porch light wasn't on. Her reflection looked back at her faintly in the glass, superimposed over black trees and the yard's edge. The gravel path wrapped around the side of the house. There shouldn't be anyone out there. She waited. Nothing moved. Amber reached for her phone and turned on the flashlight feature. She pressed it against the window pane, aiming the beam into the dark yard. The light reflected back too harshly off the glass for her to see much. Her thumb hovered over the button for the porch light. Then came the knock, a single clear knock on the window. She jerked back and dropped the phone. It thudded against the carpet, the flashlight beam swinging wildly as it landed face up beneath her bed. The knock hadn't come from the door. It was the window. Her window. Amber's breathing hitched as her hands trembled slightly. The curtain still hung open, but there was no face, no shape, no shadow. Just the yard, just the trees. She didn't move for nearly a full minute. Then slowly she leaned down, retrieved her phone, and backed away from the window. She crept to the door and pulled it open. The hallway was dark, quiet. Her parents were asleep upstairs. She considered waking them, but the sound had been so quick, so fleeting, it was almost easier to pretend it hadn't happened. A nightmare. Her mind playing tricks. Still, she didn't go back to bed. She stayed on the couch in the living room that night, the TV on low volume, her blanket pulled tight. She didn't sleep. The next morning, her mom asked about the bags under her eyes. Amber almost laughed, but just shook her head. "Did you hear anything last night?" "No," her mom said. "Why?" "I thought I heard someone on the gravel." Her mom frowned. "Probably just one of the neighborhood dogs. Or a fox. You know how it echoes out here." Amber nodded, even though that sound, that knock. She let it go. That day, she walked around the yard, checking for footprints. The grass was thick with morning dew, but nothing stood out. No prints by her window. No sign of anything disturbed. She tried to dismiss it. That night, Amber double-checked all the locks before going to bed. She closed the curtain completely and shoved her dresser in front of the window, not because she thought it would stop anyone, but just to sleep better. It didn't help. At 2:11 a.m., she heard it again. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Steady, closer. Not an animal. Not this time. She sat upright in bed, heart hammering. This time she didn't go to the window. Instead, she stayed completely still, the moonlight just enough to make out the edges of her dresser. Then came the breathing, right outside the window, slow, steady, just barely audible, like someone was standing inches from the glass. Not moving, just breathing. Amber clutched her phone, finger hovering over the emergency dial. The breathing continued for almost a full minute. Then silence. Nothing. No footsteps retreating, no whisper of movement, just gone. The next morning, Amber said nothing. She wanted to, but her parents wouldn't believe it. Her dad might go out there, walk around with a flashlight, mutter something about deer, and call it a night. So she started locking her window with the metal bar, even during the day. She took to keeping a heavy flashlight by her bedside, and she didn't sleep. That third night, the sound came earlier. 1:58 a.m. Gravel, followed by a scraping sound. A long, dragging scrape, like something heavy being pulled along the side of the house. Amber sat frozen in bed, the light from her phone glowing weakly in her hands. She thought about calling her dad, but something inside told her not to, told her to wait. The scrape stopped. Silence again. She tiptoed across the room and crouched near the dresser that blocked the window. The air felt heavier, charged somehow, like the atmosphere before a thunderstorm. Then, bang! Something slammed hard against the window. The entire pane rattled. Amber stifled a scream and fell backward, the flashlight rolling across the floor. She stared wide-eyed at the window, expecting glass to shatter, someone to crash through. But nothing happened. The banging didn't repeat. No sound of footsteps, no voice, no breathing. Just silence. She finally woke her dad. He went outside with a rifle and a flashlight, checked the yard, walked the perimeter, even searched the woods. Nothing. Probably just a raccoon, he said when he came back in. Maybe it jumped up and hit the glass. Amber didn't argue. But the window was too high for that. The dresser was chest height, and even standing on that, she couldn't reach the top of the window from the outside. Still, there was no proof, no prints, no hair, no scratches, nothing. She tried to sleep in her parents' guest room upstairs the next night, but the noise followed her. At exactly 2 a.m., she heard the front porch steps creak, softly, slowly. Then the doorknob turned, a soft rattle, back and forth. Amber was curled in the upstairs bed, staring at the hallway, her chest tight. The door was locked. She'd heard her mom check it twice before they all went to sleep. But the knob kept rattling. Then silence. A pause. Then, knock, knock. 2 knocks, firm, measured. Her parents were asleep in the next room. She listened, praying they'd heard it too. Her dad stirred. She heard the floor creak as he stood. Footsteps down the stairs. She followed slowly. He was at the front door, peering out through the side window. Nothing, just an empty porch, lit faintly by the old yellow bug light. "You heard it too," she said quietly. Her dad nodded, slowly. "Yeah." They stood there for a moment. Then he opened the door. The air outside was still, too still. Even the crickets had stopped. He stepped out, walked to the porch steps. No one was there. No footprints on the welcome mat. No sign of anyone, but something had changed. The air smelled like metal, and faintly, like something rotting. They didn't sleep the rest of that night. Her dad installed a camera by the front door the next day, another one by her window. They waited. That night, nothing. The next, silence. It lulled them. After 4 nights of terror, the stillness felt suspiciously calm. Amber barely slept, but the house remained quiet. Until the 5th night. The cameras caught nothing, but at 2:06 a.m., the power went out. Amber sat up in bed, her room pitch black. Then she heard the back door creak open. It was locked. She was sure of it. She grabbed her flashlight and crept down the hallway, heart racing. Her parents were still asleep somehow. She tried to wake them, but they stirred only briefly. She walked to the kitchen. The door was open, but nothing was broken. It looked unlocked. She backed away, heart pounding. She turned. A shadow moved across the hallway. Amber gasped, backing into the corner, holding the flashlight up. There was no one there. She checked the camera footage in the morning. The video cut out at exactly 2:05 a.m. Black screen. Came back at 3:04. 1 minute of missing footage on both cameras. She called the police that afternoon. They took a report, walked the property, told her it was probably someone messing with them, maybe a drifter, maybe some bored teens. But she could tell they didn't believe her. Not really. That night, she didn't go to bed. She sat up in the living room with the flashlight, phone, and her dad's rifle. At 2 a.m., the doorknob turned again. No knock this time. No creak of footsteps. Just a long, slow turn. Then it stopped. Silence for several seconds. Then the door creaked open on its own. Amber lifted the flashlight beam. The porch was empty, but the door had been locked. She was sure of it. Deadbolt and all. She closed it, locked it again, and backed away. Then came the whisper. Right behind her, Amber. She spun. No one was there. She ran up the stairs and woke her parents. They found the door still locked, still bolted, nothing out of place. But her dad's face was pale. He believed her now. They moved out a week later. The farmhouse sat empty for 3 months before someone else rented it. 2 months into their stay, the new tenants left in the middle of the night. They didn't leave a note, didn't take their security deposit, just vanished. Sometimes Amber dreams of the sound still, the gravel, the knock, the whisper of her name. And sometimes, in the middle of the night, even in her new apartment miles away in the city, she wakes up cold, heart hammering, and swears she hears breathing right outside her window. Story the end.